All right. Did everyone get yourself a drink, get a seat, settle in? I said we're going to try to get out of here at 9:30. Let's see how we do. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Acute Syndrome Foundation's 11th Annual SCN8A Clinician, Researcher, and Family Gathering. I'm Kacie Craig, the Executive Director of TCSF, and most importantly, Stella's mom. As many of you know, Stella is my fierce, sweet, sassy SCN8A warrior, and she is the heartbeat behind so much of the work I do. This year marks the 12th anniversary of our foundation. Our theme, 12 years at the intersection of science and love, beautifully captures who we are and why we are here. Tonight, you can feel that intersection everywhere. One side, we have the clinicians, researchers, and industry partners, people pushing the boundaries of what is possible in rare epilepsy research, developing treatments, running clinical trials, and working towards breakthroughs that our families urgently need. And on the other side, we have love. The families, the caregivers, siblings, and children who show extraordinary resilience every single day. In this combination, science guided by profound love, that has always defined the SCN8A community. It's what makes us strong, and it's what keeps us moving forward together. When this gathering first began, it was a small group of families and a few pioneering clinicians and researchers who believed in the power of proximity, bringing science and families into the same room, talking with each other, learning from one another. That simple but bold idea has become a tradition, and now you look around the room filled with new families, longtime families, scientific leaders, and industry visionaries. It's clear how far we've come and how our community has grown and evolved. This growth reflects something important. We are not only increasing awareness, we are increasing impact. We are driving research, clinical trials, and deeper scientific understanding forward, while simultaneously strengthening the support system for families to need to strive, to survive, and to thrive. This year, TCSF's invested more heavily than ever in family-centered programming. Everything we create is by SCN8A families for SCN8A families, built around the needs, hopes, and realities you share with us. In 2025, we expanded our opportunities for connection. Paint and sip nights, monthly book clubs, monthly chit chats, and a bereavement support group. These moments matter. They give us space to breathe, to laugh, to grieve, and to be understood. A theme emerged throughout this year's programming: tools. Tools to support caregivers emotionally, tools to help families identify seizures or movement disorders with more confidence, tools that bring clarity, confidence, and empowerment to every day with SCN8A. And a highlight of that effort was Caregiver Talk and Tools, which is a session part of our Meaningful Change education series. This was led by life coach Kara Riska. This session offered practical, thoughtful tools caregivers could take home and use immediately, reminding us that empowering families in itself is a meaningful form of progress. And of course, our most cherished tools for families is the Connor James Smith Patient Assistant Grant, which has supported families all over the world. These families were in deep medical and financial need. This program is a reflection of what happens when community, generosity, and purpose intersect. Tonight, we continue another long-standing tradition, the blending of cutting-edge science and the lived experience of families. We will hear about exciting developments, ongoing clinical trials, new discoveries, and areas of research that are gaining momentum. This is a moment of real progress for SCN8A, and it is fueled by collaboration between all of you, clinicians, researchers, industry partners, and families who share your stories, your data, your time, and your trust. And we know, especially for families, that information can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming. So tomorrow, we will connect the science conversation with someone that many of you already know and trust. Raquel Morales, I always say it wrong. I practice it 3 times in my hotel room. Shelley can tell you. Morales is the Science and Research Director for the SCN8A Alliance. Raquel, with along of the help of 2 of our speakers tonight, will help synthesize all of the information that you hear tonight. And it will allow time for families to ask questions, to reflect, and maybe you just need time to process tonight. But don't worry, Raquel, Caeley, and Joshua will be there tomorrow to help you out. As we step into tonight's program, I want to thank every single person in this room. To the clinicians and researchers, your commitments to this community is extraordinary. And your belief in these children fuels innovation. To our industry partners, your investments, your willingness to listen, and your collaboration with caregivers and scientists are key drivers to progress. And to our volunteers, I live the life that you live. I know how precious your time is, and I greatly appreciate every moment that you put into this community. None of this would be able to be happening without you. If you're a TCSF volunteer, I would love for you to stand so we can recognize you. I also am going to call out my executive team. Shelley Frappier is our Director of Patient Engagement and Data Management. Nico's mom is here. We have Danielle Hayward. She might be on baby duty. She is our Director of Development and Communication, and Lucy's mom. We have Liz Ramirez. She's probably also running around doing a job. She is our Director of Bereavement Support and Grants Advisor, and Will's mom. And then, yes, let's give her a round of applause. And Megan Varner. She's back there, our Director of Marketing and my technical guru of all things. She is Lily's sister, and she is an amazing part of our team. I also want to point out we have a board of director here, Marianne Sutcliffe and Brianna's mom. And most importantly, to our families. You are the heart of everything. The strength, the love, the determination you bring to this community pushes us all to do better and to be better. Science moves us forward. Love holds us together. And when both are present, as they are in this room today, we create a powerful force for change. Welcome to the 11th annual SCN8A gathering. We are honored to be here with you, and we are stronger because we are here together. Before I introduce our first speaker, we have a few housekeeping items. The restrooms, if you haven't seen them on your way in, when you head out to this hallway, you take a right, and both sets of restrooms are there to your right. We also have an area called the boardroom. So if you just need a few minutes to take a breather, if your kiddos need to go color, you can head on over to the boardroom. When you get out to this hallway, take a right and go all the way at the end of the hallway, and there's a lovely room with lots of windows, and you can even enjoy some night air on the terrace. All right, on to our first speaker. I am honored to introduce our first family speaker, Sheress Bowen, a devoted wife to Dion and proud mother of 3, Isaiah, India, and Ivory. She is the co-owner, along with her husband, of Epic Art Universe, a dynamic marketing and creative agency. Sheress is also the co-founder of the Equity Project Foundation, a nonprofit addressing food deserts in Baltimore City. Through the foundation, she provides after-school programs and serves a passionate advocate and connector of minority youth. Come on up, Sheress. I know, it's winding. I know the ramp's really loud. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak about Ivory's journey. Just want to point out that's a really good picture of me. Don't look like that now. This morning we came in from Baltimore, so hence the reason why we are kind of dressed down, but I'm here. So our journey with Ivory, more like a roller coaster, lots of highs, lots of lows. So I'll start from 2018. This is when I was pregnant. When I was pregnant with Ivory, everything was normal, it was great. I did, in hindsight, with Ivory, she used to ball up a lot. I know women that are pregnant know that feeling when they ball up. I thought it was normal. I have 2 older children, so they did the same thing, but one thing I noticed after she received her diagnosis is that she did it more often. It was one point I was in a business meeting and Ivory balled up on one side, and afterwards, oh, look at my beautiful family. Afterwards, she did a rhythmic movement. Still didn't think of a seizure. Seizures was not in my vocabulary. It was not anything that I thought of or anyone had. As far as a seizure, I was the only one who had a seizure. I had a seizure as a baby, a febrile seizure. And then I had one as an adult when I was eclamptic. I had a seizure. But other than that, it was just one of those things that was like a seizure is not, didn't come across. So Ivory was born in 2019 in January. And I noticed some awkward moving in March of 2019. And I just chalked it up to being one of those movement crazy baby things. Didn't really think about it, but I did take her to the hospital, and they said, oh, well, you know, she had a febrile seizure. It's okay. Maybe, you know, temperature rose really fast, and that's what happened. So we went home. Next day, the same movement. She would stiffen, jerk, and then she would just fall asleep. Took her to Johns Hopkins University for the second time, and that's where they confirmed that she in fact did have a seizure. And they did a MRI to check her brain. Everything was normal, and still in my mind, my child didn't have seizures. It was just one of those things that happened. They gave us Cabrera. For a month she was fine, and you know, people would check on her, and I would say, okay, no, she had a seizure, but you know, we're gonna wean her off the Cabrera and she'll be fine. It's just one of those things that happened. Well, they kept coming, and they kept coming, and they kept coming. And each time she had a seizure, I would take her to Johns Hopkins. Sometimes it would be 3-4 times a week. I soon realized that a job was not one of those things I could do. So I quit my job to take care of my child. I kept going to Johns Hopkins because I had past trauma. What people don't understand is I have 20 years ago, I was pregnant with a child, and she passed from SIDS. So I already have the trauma of losing a child. I know how it is to bury a child. I know how small a coffin is, and that sits with me. And when I found out that Ivy was having seizures, or when I recognized she was having seizures, in my mind, that was not happening on my watch. She's gonna go to the hospital all the time, every time. It wasn't until, October, she was admitted to Johns Hopkins. Seizures kind of changed. While we were there, we were admitted, and she was on a keto diet. It did work for a little bit, but it completely didn't take the seizures away. It wasn't until December of 2019 that we got her diagnosis. The ironic thing is that is the same year that you guys had the conference in Baltimore. It was the same year. I think the conference was December the 8th. We got the official diagnosis December the 12th. Our neurologist at that time said we kind of figured that was the reason for her seizures, but we didn't want to send you there and you get committed and find friends, and then that's not it. But we officially got the diagnosis phone call. I remember when she gave me the diagnosis, I immediately, on the phone, I Googled. First thing it said, catastrophic form of epilepsy. I erased Google. I said, I typed it wrong. That's not it. Did it again, said catastrophic. And then I picked where it said life expectancy, and it told me 10 years, and I was devastated. I remember during that moment thinking to myself, how can I birth a child that is born with an expiration date? I already know this pain, and it's not anything that goes away. It carries with you. My daughter would have been 20 years old, and I still think about her to this day. So after that, I went through a series of emotions. The first emotion was rejection. It was at a point that I did not want to touch Ivory. I was scared to touch her. I didn't want to love Ivory because I felt like I was going to put all this love into her and she wasn't going to be here. And then I prayed and I leaned into my faith. And that's what got me through. I remember looking through Facebook to find a group, and it was Lacey who found me. I don't know how she found me. I think I was in a generic group, and I just, put in SCN8A, and she found me, and she told me about, the acute syndrome. And she said, you should join. So I sent in my paperwork, and I logged on. I was finally able to see everyone. And I said, oh, my God, I am in a community. I'm not by myself. There are moms and dads who are dealing with the exact same thing. In fact, I was so happy. The first person that I was happy to see was Karen and Lily. I said, all right. During that time, I think Lily was about 21, I believe, during that time. And I said, all right, 10 years, we got that. Lily is now 27 years old, and I am so grateful that God has kept her. She is what I say is the OG. She's the big sister of them all. Another person who sticks out for me is Kenz. She lives in Baltimore. That's the first thing they said was like, well, she lives in Baltimore. You guys are close to each other. And it's so many people that stick out to me. Nico, he sticks out to me. Billy, he sticks out to me. I feel like I know everyone. But how do I handle SCN8A? I handle it in what I call a trifecta. One's God, one is nature, and one's medicine. There's been times that I have held my daughter through seizures. In fact, she is Just had one. She's with her dad. I have tears running down my eyes. I'm whispering prayers because I don't have strength. The appointments are piling up. Answers are unclear. And fear begins to set in. And I realize this is where I lean on God. He's there with me in the hospital room. He's with me in the waiting room. He's with me in those quiet moments. My faith becomes my oxygen. My prayer becomes my strategy. My worship becomes my warfare. Sorry. Next is nature. I believe all in what is needed God has already provided. We just haven't received the answers yet. It's already out there. As far with nature, I try to give Ivory as natural herbs as possible. Try to cut out a lot of sugars and processed foods. Try to get her gut health together because we do know that constipation is an issue amongst our children. Try to give her rest, which is what she needs. And I also remember that nature does not replace God. Last, but certainly not least, I lean on medicine, understanding that the doctors and researchers are not separate from him. They're actually instruments used by him. That every neurologist, every therapist, and every medication, and every piece of research, God has his hands in. I pray over every treatment. I pray over every invite. I pray over every order. I don't choose between neither one of them. All of them are equally. As far as my career-wise, I'm a realtor, so I can stay home. And I am a travel agent, so I stay home with that as well. As far as my family isn't typical. Like no one else's family is typical. Plans are sometimes impromptu. They fall apart. I've learned to be very flexible and just roll with the punches. Whatever Ivory wants to do, that's what we're going to do that day. So I stand before you, not saying that it's easy because it's not easy, but letting you know that God withstands us and is with us through nature and through medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheress, for your story and for sharing Ivory with us. I would now like to introduce Dr. Manoj Patel, Associate Professor in the Department of Anesthesiology at the University of Virginia. He will be moderating our researcher presentations this evening. And a quick reminder for our virtual attendees, please put all your questions into the chat and we'll make sure to address them after each presentation.
That is a noisy ramp. I'm not going to be using it. I shouldn't say that as Kacie walks down it. Hello, everybody. My name is Manoj Patel. I know the majority of you folks here, and I say this every year, but I really do mean it. It's really is the favorite time for me to come to this meeting, come here, see you guys, and it kind of drives us to go back to the lab and you know, have a real passion for what it is that we're trying to do. And so I'm really excited, and I know we're going to say thanks to you guys at the end, I'm sure, but you know, it takes a lot to get this up and running, and the organization from the families, it's fantastic. So thank you so much. We're in for a treat today because there's three outstanding science talks, and so you know, one of the talks is going to be Caeley Reever is a grad student at my lab, and she has been working on the next generation of therapies that are coming through. There's a lot of talks at this meeting about gene therapies, and so she's going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in our lab to use gene therapies to target some of these SCN8A variants. We're still a bit of a ways away, but there's been some huge progress in other diseases using gene therapy. So I think it's interesting and it's important to at least expose you guys to what's happening and where we are with this field. So without delay, I'm going to get Caeley to come up here and tell you a little bit about the research she's been doing. Thank you.
All right. Is this it? All right, we're getting there, I think. Yeah, you're good. And there's a monitor down there. Thank you so much. Perfect. I'm blind. Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon. I wish I could tell you guys how honored I am to be here, but all I can do is share with you guys my passion about our lab's project. And so without further ado, I'm going to dive into our lab's data exploring how we utilize base editors to target and treat developmental epileptic encephalopathies, or as you all know, SCN8A DEEs. So we're going to start off first by exploring the current landscape of SCN8A DEEs, and then we're going to move into our lab's data, examining how we can use base editors as a precise therapeutic to target this DEE activity. And then we're going to expand and envision a new future where base editing and CRISPR technology, could be a powerful therapeutic option not only for DEEs, but other channelopathies and monogenic natures as well. So the NaV1.6 sodium voltage-gated ion channel is essential for regulating neuronal excitability and crosstalk. Single base mutations that are de novo or randomly arising in nature, as depicted in red and blue through the gene SCN8A that encodes this NaV1.6 channel, leads to widespread neuronal dysfunction, refractory recurrent seizures, a range of comorbidities, and an increased risk of SUDEP. Our lab is attempting to resolve these SCN8A DEEs by targeting them at the root of the issue, so that variant base that's causing these DEEs. How are we doing this? Well, we started by applying adenine base editors to one of the most recurrent and severe DEE-causing mutations related to SCN8A, the R1872W variant. An adenine base editor is able to target the base adenine in the genome, and how it does this is it combines a catalytically inactive Cas9 domain, which searches the genome, and when you partner that with a deaminase domain and a guide RNA that acts like a walking stick to help this complex search the genome for its specific site it's supposed to go to, we can use it to target specific single nucleotide changes and revert them to the normal form. And so how we did this, well, if you look at 1872W in a typical patient, what we see is an arginine coded by a CGG. And in patients with the R1872W variant, we see that C change into a T. Now with that thymine on the top strand, we also have an adenine paired with it on the bottom, which now we can enable base editors to target to. So how do we do this? Well, a base editor targets that adenine and produces a hydrodeamination reaction. What that does is it changes adenine into a base that doesn't exist in our genome, inosine. Inosine really resembles a base that does exist in our genes, guanine. And so canonical repair mechanisms in all of our cells will revert it back to the base it's supposed to be, thereby inducing that change on the top strand too. So that's how we can use these base editor constructs to target single bases that cause these DEEs and revert them into the form that they would be in an everyday patient. We began first by evaluating 16 potential constructs targeted to the R1872W variant. The best construct of those, so the most efficient in reverting the variant to the healthy form, was then packaged into a viral construct, a non-immunogenic viral construct called AAVs. That was partnered with a third virus that had GFP, which is a green fluorescent protein that lights up wherever our treatment gets into, and that allows us to visualize across the brain where our treatment's really going into. And we took that combination and injected them into mice at postnatal day 2, so 2 days after birth. And these mice expressed the R1872W variant and were gifted to our lab by someone who many of you guys know, Miriam Meisler at the University of Michigan. So to evaluate our ABE treatment on these mice, what we did first is we used 2 different expression lines. The first in blue is called E2A Cre. It's a global expression. It's very severe, and what that means is they exhibit a single lethal seizure before 21 days after birth. That's a short amount of time, so we also wanted to extend it a bit, and that's why we used the EMX1 Cre line. They exhibit recurrent seizures within 4 weeks of age and seizure-induced premature lethality within 3 months of age. What we saw in the first group, our E2A Cre group, is that mice treated with the base editor, depicted in orange, about 50% of them survived past their sham control counterparts, so variant-expressing mice, which is shown in blue. Similarly, but way more pronounced, in our second EMX Cre group, we only saw 3 mice succumb to premature death, shown in purple, and compared to their sham counterparts in green. But what we see at the very end of both lines in both of the mice is that we had mice that survived past 150 days, which is very significant survival. Specifically in the EMX Cre group, we had mice that lived up to a year old and were taken down for genomic sequencing. We discovered in both groups that there was a high correlation between the level of editing and amelioration of this premature death. So what we saw in the first E2A Cre group in orange is that you need approximately 20% reversion of the genome from that variant to the healthy form for amelioration of premature death. In the EMX Cre group, we saw that level was about 15%. In both expression lines, we noticed that mice with approximately 5% didn't live significantly past their variant counterparts. So we knew that, hey, we could target this base. We can rescue premature death, but how are we doing that? How are we impacting seizure activity, which is a big thing for all you families? And so we evaluated this with electroencephalogram recordings. And what we found is that, yes, these variant mice display recurrent, severe seizures and die of seizure-induced lethality within 3 months. In comparison, when we treat these mice with a base editor, we had only 1 mouse in the group die prematurely, which we later found out was due to poor delivery of the system, not a failure of the system itself. Out of the remaining 10 mice, only 3 mice exhibited recurrent seizures, and they exhibited less seizures on average than their sham counterparts. Not only did they have less seizures, they were less intense. So our mice treated with the base editor that did have seizures only experienced Racine scale seizures from 1 to 2, so no severe tonic-clonic episodes. Our sham variant mice had all types of seizures and all had tonic-clonic episodes. So they had less seizures and less intense seizures. We also noticed that there was another correlation with editing, but this time with seizure amelioration. We saw that mice that had approximately 15% editing had significant survival, but still exhibited some seizure activity. However, mice that received 17% reversion of that variant to the healthy form or above not only showed significant rescue of premature death, but also showed no seizure activity. We know it's really important with these genome editors. We only go to the one spot we're aiming. We can't go to the other parts of the genome, otherwise it's not safe. To make sure that we have a very precise and safe therapeutic that we're presenting for you guys, we did off-target evaluations across all RNA and all DNA, so all transcriptomes and all genomes across a bunch of mice that lived up to a year with our base editor treatment. What we found in the really high bar in purple, that's our on-target activity. That's what our base editor is able to do at that R1872W variant. And what we see is that across the board, everything else is really low. And what that means is that our therapy is very specific for the 1872W loci, and it goes nowhere else in the genome. Very precise. Hyperexcitability is a driver of seizure activity in R1872W variant mice. We wanted to understand the underlying mechanisms of how we're getting rid of these seizures. With our GFP virus, that green fluorescent protein that I mentioned before, we saw that our treatment had widespread expression across the brain, which is great for what we needed. We saw it especially in the hippocampus and cortex. So what we did is we looked deeper into the cortex and examined how the neurons were firing. Typically, neurons are hyperexcitable in the cortex, which propagates seizures. But what we saw is that hyperexcitability in our first CRE line, which is depicted in blue, how it's a higher bar than the rest of them, was brought back down to wild type levels, so normal levels, which is black, by our base editor treatment in orange. Similarly, in the EMX1 group, we saw the same effect, where the where the variant mice shown in green that exhibit hyperexcitability was brought down by our base editor treatment in purple to wild type levels in black. The presence of the tryptophan at that 1872W location causes a dysregulation of sodium ions, and that leads to a pathogenic persistent current. So sodium ions are moving at a time when they're not supposed to be moving anymore. When correcting the base, we see that the pathogenic persistent current induced by that variant, which is shown in green compared to the curve in black, is brought back down by the ABE. So the reason why we're getting rid of seizures is we're getting rid of this pathogenic persistent current. And the reason why we're decreasing seizures and the pathogenic persistent current also contributes to that decrease in hyperexcitability we're seeing. So not only did we evaluate a bunch of electrophysiological recordings, EEG recordings, and genetic data, but we also considered the range of comorbidities that these patients experience. We evaluated and found that EMX CRE mice shown in green and the center panel during an open field test, they showed anxiety phenotypes and movement discrepancies compared to mice that did not have the variant. Now, with our ABE treatment, which is shown in purple in the panel to the far, we see that ABE treatment completely got rid of movement discrepancies in these mice and started to bring anxiety levels back to a wild type level. And what this means is that we could potentially, with this base editor, resolve some of the comorbidities these patients could face in the future. So to summarize, with a base editor for SCN8As, we can very precisely target the genome and induce that change to cause changes in transcript, and healthy protein is now produced. With that healthy protein being produced, we see a decrease in premature death and a reduction in the frequency and severity of seizures. And that decrease in seizures is directly caused by us decreasing the underlying neuronal hyperexcitability and eliminating the pathogenicity of that current. So base editing could be a very powerful therapeutic option for patients with this variant, but others. We're working on 7 very recurrent mutations within the SCN8A population, and we're hoping that we can further expand this as we grow. We have a lot of hope for this type of therapy. Not every variant might be able to be treated with this, but many could, and it's a very powerful hope for our future, not only for SCN8A DEEs, but other channelopathies as well. Thank you guys very much.
Turn it on? Okay. That one's not working.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
So, hi, Caeley. Thank you for this beautiful presentation. 2 very quick questions. One very specific, and the other one more open picture. I was wondering, in the case of the EMX versus the E2A, EMX is more expressed in the medial prefrontal cortex and some of the hippocampus. So are you predicting that the 25% efficiency on your other model is because the coverage is not as good as in the EMX?
So are you talking about the coverage of the therapy or the coverage of the expression of the variant?
The coverage of the therapy, because you can imagine, I saw the wide expression, but I was wondering.
I think you're
maybe
referring to the percentage, right? So the percentage
so
in the E2A CRE and the EMX1 were slightly different in terms of the survival.
Yes, I think that has to do with in the E2A CRE line, or survival or editing. For
editing.
Editing. So for the E2A CRE line, the editing could have been just a little bit higher because since it's a global model, there's more of those cells expressing the variant. As opposed to the EMX CRE model, there are less neurons expressing that variant. So one is a global, and like you said, the EMX CRE model has less neurons that are expressing that variant. That's why they do exhibit the premature lethality later than the E2A CRE line.
And on that sense, well, this promising results, it's beautiful. I was just wondering, P2 will be the equivalent of some embryonic human state. Are you guys planning on testing on like farther stages of development? Because most of the patients, they get diagnosed once they're out.
Absolutely. Wonderful question.
Just go to the mic, because I don't think they can.
I'm usually a loud person, so I don't do mics, but I'm so sorry. So great question. We have been using P2 since many other people do. We have an adolescent model, but you make a very great point, and we are in our lab starting to utilize the CAD-CRE model, which is a tamoxifen-induced model. And what we're going to do is essentially induce seizure activity, then give the base editor and see how that can impact survival. So we are working on that. We think it's very important to define that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions?
We have some questions in the chat. I don't know if there's
Okay.
time.
There's questions in the chat. If we've got time, there's questions over here. I just want to make one point. When we talk about these mice and we talk about the fact that they have a survival, remember these mice are not treated with anything, right? They're not given any anticonvulsant drugs, so they're just kind of on their own. And that's why we see such a reduced survival in our animals. Did you have a question?
I did. Obviously, very exciting results that you're seeing so far. If you were to sort of project out, so you're working on 1872 right now, would you test all the other variants that you're planning on testing first before even thinking about, kind of a phase 2, like actually working with humans?
Actually, no. So our pathway will be a little bit built as we go, as guidelines have been changing recently regarding therapies for orphan diseases. But right now, it seems like we would go forward with 1872. We have acquired iPSC cells, so stem cells from patients that we're testing other variants on right now. And what I've seen is that we could be able to go to the FDA just with 1872 in our mouse model. And if we have a plethora of human data in these human cells for other variants, that might be acceptable for them. But like I said, that is not cement. All these regulations are very changing very quickly. So. But the idea is that we wouldn't have to go through, hopefully, trials for each variant.
Great talk. Thank you so much. I have a very general question. Would you hypothesize improvement in development as well, in addition to improved seizures?
I'm sorry, I think I missed the first part of your question. My apologies.
Do you hypothesize an improvement in childhood development in addition to the decreased seizures?
I think it's definitely possible. What other people believe is the earlier you can resolve these things, the better outcomes you'll have for some of these comorbidities. And I think that probably will hold true for us. But we have seen other groups with patients that are already experiencing comorbidities that have some of those resolved with gene therapy. So we're not really sure, but it'll be very exciting to figure out how this is going to translate.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll just add one other thing. I think for all the gene therapies, the biggest problem we're having right now is to get enough of it into the brain, okay? So it's like it has to go all over, and it's easy in mice to do that. We can get it into the ventricles that we can get in elsewhere. But there are lots of people that are working on different ways of getting these constructs in, right? There's a lot of diseases out there that are genetic, that can be base editors or other types of gene therapy can be used. And so we're really hopeful that in the next few years, there are much better ways of getting these viruses in and expressing. Okay, so thank you, Caeley. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys very much.
All right, Caeley, I'm actually going to have you stay up here. We have an exciting announcement, which is following your presentation. So please watch for the first time an update from SCN8A Italia.
Dear Patel Lab, we heard for the first time about your new gene therapy approach in Germany at the 2A conference, and we came home with a terrific hope for the future, and we shared the news with the other families here in Italy. So, SCN8A Italia is pleased to announce that we're going to support your base editing research project with 40,000 euros, approximately 46,000 US dollars, to specifically support this project that really shapes a better future for our children, for the SCN8A children worldwide. Thank you so much for your commitment. Thank you.
Thank you guys very much. Sorry. Oh yeah, no, I guess yeah, quick. Yeah, you guys don't know how much our lab cares. Minaj has birthed a lot of care into our lab. This is our family. I work 7 days a week for you guys. I care so much, and I'm so grateful that you guys have allowed me to talk to you guys and have gifted us this opportunity. Thank you.
Oh, here we go. It takes a bit of time for it to come. Okay, so we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Joshua Hack. I think he needs no introduction. Everybody knows him from the work he's done in Michael Hammer's group, but now he is a grad student at UCLA, and he continues. I know your project is different now, but he continues to work on SCN8A in his spare time. And so he's a bit of a wizard at AI and modeling. And I know we have been talking regularly with putting data in from SCN8A, and he does it all in his spare time. So we're really, really lucky to have someone like Josh who's just going to continue behind the scenes. I don't know where you find the time, but you do. So I really appreciate that. So excited to hear your progress. Thank you, Josh.
My wife isn't too happy with my schedule, but... yeah, I'm Joshua Hack. Thank you very much for having me present my work again in front of you. My first time presenting at this meeting was a couple of years ago, where I presented a idea of a machine learning pipeline that would take us from diagnosis between gain of function, loss of function, to prognosis for clinical outcome, and then eventually to treatment. And I'm happy to report that today I will be presenting on that third phase and that completion of the pipeline. So the theme of my presentation is advancing clinical management of SCN8A related disorders through machine learning. And like I said, I'll be focusing primarily on treatment and which medications to select. So as we all know, the treatment landscape is incredibly diverse and chaotic. We have almost 40 different medications reported in the patient registry, and these are ranging across at least 6 different mechanisms of action, sodium channel blockers being the primary choice for all medications, but we also have calcium channel blockers, GABAergic, SVP2As, which is the family for Keppra, and Briviact, different types of steroids, and then those that fall into the multiple mechanisms of action. So with all of this, it's a very chaotic landscape. It's hard to tell which medications are actually providing a benefit, and this is compounded by the fact that every patient is averaging around 7 different medications over the course of 11 years of treatment. And so that comes out to 3 current ASMs as their average that they're currently on, and then 4 weaned across the entire cohort of around 250 individuals. The wonderful work from the clinical consensus over the last few years came to the conclusion that we really only have strong clinical consensus on oxcarbazepine and carbamazepine working effectively for SCN8A gain-of-function patients. We don't have great consensus on anything outside of those 2, aside from Keppra should be avoided for almost all cases. This makes it particularly difficult for clinicians to choose a medication when they are starting out after they get that SCN8A diagnosis. Obviously, we might want to prefer a sodium channel blocker, but which sodium channel blocker is going to be the best? Is it going to be oxcarb? Is it going to be carbamazepine? Or is it something else? And this leads to a trial and error approach that's kind of just throwing whatever you can at a wall and hoping something sticks. And importantly, this is not the clinician's fault. They are operating in the dark almost entirely. We have very little knowledge so far as to what the underlying mechanisms are for each of these medications and why they work for each specific patient. And so it is a hit or miss, but hoping to improve all of that with this project. So this leads to the ultimate question of how can we increase the likelihood of prescribing a beneficial medication as early as possible in treatment. And so this is using the data that all of you caregivers have provided for us in the patient registry, and then putting it through a machine learning algorithm using the clinical features. So that's taking into account the seizure profile, age at onset, types of seizures, genetic variant, and then developmental profile and comorbidities to get an output of 5 recommended medications from this list of 18 is what we ended up working with for the study based on data restrictions for the other remaining 22 or so medications. We then went through what's called a clinician game, or what we were calling a clinician's game, where we essentially had them compete against the algorithm for recommending a beneficial medication, and then had a second phase where they worked with the algorithm to recommend a beneficial medication. So, not to get too into the weeds with the machine learning aspect, I know that it can be boring for even machine learning experts. We trained it across a number of different variations until the model ended up converging, so the model performance didn't improve anymore after that point. We had our data set split into a variety of different subsets just to make sure that we were not overfitting the model on anything. But what we were really interested in was the responses for those top 5 medications that the algorithm was recommending. These were categorized as beneficial, which are those that are reported in the registry as being among the best medications. And the reason for that medication being the best could be impact on seizures, their frequency and duration, it could be impact on side effects, or it could be impact on alertness. And so we were able to take into account caregiver priorities through that. Ineffective, which are those that were not reported as either best or worst medications by the caregiver. Untested are those that were never prescribed for the individual, and then detrimental, which are those that were reported as the worst medication. On average, our model across 5 runs performs with about 76% accuracy. So for 76 of patients, we are able to recommend a beneficial medication within the first 5 medications. Based on their clinical profile. You can see the splits for how that actually plays out in regards to order of recommendations in the bar chart there. Oxcarbazepine is by far the most recommended in that first position, followed by carbamazepine as expected, but interestingly, lacosamide, lamotrigine, phenytoin as the sodium channel blockers, as expected, are popping up as generally beneficial for the entire population. And then finally, clonazepam as a non-sodium channel blocker medication that seems to be generally beneficial for almost all patients across 1,100 trials. As I said, we ran a clinician's game. So in phase 1, clinicians were given the seizure profile of a patient, the developmental profile, and the genetic variant. And then they were given the same list of 18 medications that we were giving our machine learning algorithm and told to recommend 3 medications from that list. Overall, about 22% of the clinician recommendations were beneficial versus 39% from the algorithm. In phase 2, they were given the same clinical profile information, and then they were also given information from the 3 different machine learning predictors that we've developed within the Hammer Lab. So they were given a prediction for gain or loss of function, they were given a prediction for clinical subgroup and trajectory, and then finally, instead of choosing from 18 medications, they were choosing from 3, and if they didn't like any of those 3 options, they were allowed to recommend a 4th option. In this phase, we saw the performance of the clinicians increase to 46% of their recommendations being beneficial, which is a highly significant increase in performance. The caveat being we only had 4 clinicians participate, and this was also a small survey, and so the the implications for whether or not that is a powerful result are still being figured out. So ultimately, what we did was employed machine learning to reduce our landscape of effective medications for doctors to consider at first diagnosis from around 30 to 40 medications down to 6. And these are oxcarbazepine, lamotrigine, lacosamide, carbamazepine, phenytoin, and clonazepam. And then there are specific use cases for ACTH as an example, where those are recommended to be used. And so we leave that to the clinician to make that final decision. The limitations of the study are largely due to data availability. So each ASM was treated as a monotherapy. We weren't able to assess combinations of medications, which is obviously not reflected in the population. Again, the median number of current ASMs is 3 for each patient. And some of the effects on seizure burden may be misattributed to certain ASMs. So if you're on a combination of oxcarbazepine, lamotrigine, and lacosamide, you may be saying oxcarb is the best medication when in actuality it's lacosamide. There's also not enough dosage information, and so while we can recommend a medication, we can't recommend the dose that is actually likely to be effective, and in some of these cases, it's going to require a very high dose. We finally don't have a high-quality, high-resolution data set for seizure tracking, which we're working on with the help of Helpelepsy. We have a prospective study going. If you're interested in joining, I have a QR code on my tablet that I'm happy to share with you to get you signed up. It is a daily seizure tracker that we also provide a report of your data for day-to-day seizure events, as well as mood, sleep, et cetera. And then the set of ASMs is not exhaustive. We did not include cenobamate or fenfluramine because of limited data. Another potentially beneficial medication is eslicarbazepine, but there wasn't enough data for patients who had tried that medication in order to include it or get a large enough signal in the modeling. So we've successfully expanded on conclusions from the clinical consensus that carbamazepine and oxcarb are generally effective for the population and have included 4 other medications. We still need to work on developing a granular data set for seizure burden so we have an actual quantified result. But ultimately, this is a successful foundational study for providing a first pass at machine learning tools for recommending effective treatment in the clinic, but still needs to be treated as a first step, and more validation needs to be done. And we also have just gotten a paper accepted looking at the citizen electronic medical records that supports the 6 medications that were selected by the model as being ideal medications for the general population. So that will be coming out hopefully in the next few months, officially published. And the most immediate future, next step is conducting a more formal study of clinician algorithm interactions, where we'll hopefully have more clinicians participating, have a larger survey built out, and are able to better assess how much the clinician's decision-making for medication is actually being impacted by the algorithm. This was published back in October, and I'll wrap up by thanking all of you. Without you guys providing your data in the registry, none of this would be possible. And we have a number of other machine learning projects going on using registry found in the data that we're looking forward to sharing with you guys in the future. Thank you.
So we have time for some questions. Are there any questions out there? Anybody have any questions?
We have one in the chat here.
Okay.
Does your model include the impacts of side effects?
So we have a question in the registry when you rank a medication as far as how it impacts seizure frequency, seizure duration, side effects, and alertness. We do take into account side effects. What those specific side effects are, we don't have that data for. So if a medication, this is where the caregiver priority comes into play. If the medication, one, is reducing seizures at a comparable level, but still less than medication 2, but doesn't have the side effects associated with it, or has a lower impact on the alertness of your child, then the caregiver is more than likely still ranking that medication over the medication that may have a slightly larger impact on seizure burden, but has all of these side effects or leaves your child drowsy throughout the day.
Question here.
I'm going to ask a question out of my wheelhouse, but do you believe that with increased models of AI learning that we can utilize for drug-protein interactions, that this will hopefully change the environment and give us better definitions to how these drugs are going to react in these patients or to future?
Yes, we just need the data for it. Is a large part of the issue. So we've been working on a project looking at biophysical properties of the variants that we've characterized and how those interact with medication response and clinical profile. And we have, didn't have enough time to get into those, unfortunately, but there seems to be some correlation and predictability in regards to medication response based on the electrophysiological consequence of a variant. I expect that if we were to get better pharmacokinetics data interacting with NaV 1.6 specifically, and systems data with NaV 1.6 interacting with other sodium and calcium channels and potassium channels, we would be able to get a much more precise recommendation and get a better understanding of that precision medicine.
So do you predict like a tool in the future where you compile all this data in, what you just mentioned, all the drug-drug interactions, the different phenotypes of the children that physicians could use to help them make a decision on what might be the best drug moving forward initially?
Yes, eventually. I think we're already seeing that start to coalesce in other diseases. So we see it particularly in the field of cancer. We're seeing it pop up more with dementia and Alzheimer's, where we're predicting the clinical trajectory and developmental trajectory as well as optimal treatment. And so there's a lot of work going on in the space of optimizing treatment that's taking into account not just clinical profile, but also life history, and I think some of them are also including socioeconomic status, region, et cetera. And I think eventually we will reach that point. The question is, how generalizable will it be? And if we have to keep making a unique tool for SCN8A, make a unique tool for SCN8A, and then again for all of the calcium channels, and it becomes a question of feasibility.
Yeah. Well, this is really exciting, and thank you so much, Josh, for spending all your free time working on this project. I think it's going to be huge moving forward. So thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna wrap up with the research talks with one last talk today, still on the field of gene therapy, and the talk is CRISPR activation for sodium channel disorders, insights from SCN8A haploinsufficiency, and the speaker is Perry Spratt, and I believe this was all when you were in Kevin Bender's lab. Yeah, so it's really exciting work. I've read your paper, so I'm excited that you're going to tell us more about that study. Thank you.
So, excellent. Thank you for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me here to talk about my work. As you can probably glean from the title, this is about SCN8A, which is a gene that I spent my PhD studying, understanding its role in the neuron. It's a counterpart to SCN8A. Within the neuron, they both trade off roles to make sure neurons function properly, and unfortunately in both cases when you have variants that change how both SCN8A and SCN8A work, you get neurodevelopmental disorders. And so I'm going to talk about our work studying SCN8A haploinsufficiency and approaches we've taken to use CRISPR activation to treat it. And it has, we're at my current job, which is at this company called Regal Therapeutics, where we're a for-profit company that's trying to translate this technology for Dravet syndrome and SCN8A. But I also hope that generally that this technology could be used broadly for other neurodevelopmental disorders, including SCN8A loss of function variants. So everything's going to be about SCN8A, but I think there is relevance to the SCN8A community. So like SCN8A, SCN8A disorders fall on a spectrum, depending on what the variants do to the sodium channel's function. So on one hand, we have gain-of-function variants. These increase the activity of the channel. They make them more excitable. In the case of SCN8A, this leads to neonatal epileptic encephalopathy. So these children are often found having seizures in utero. They have seizures very early in life. And then on the other end, we have variants that either lead to protein truncation or missense variants that cause loss of channel function. So inhibiting current through the channel, inhibiting the kinetics that make the channel less excitable. And the therapeutic approach for the gain-of-function variants is fairly clear. So we want to block NaV1.2, or we want to reduce its expression to reduce the expression of the pathological variant. And there are medications that are effective at doing this. There are sodium channel blocking medications that are increasingly being tailored towards SCN8A and NaV1.2 loss or gain-of-function variants. And there's also antisense oligonucleotide approaches that are beginning to show efficacy in terms of reducing seizures in children with gain-of-function and SCN8A variants. What is needed is an approach for, or what is further behind, but I think is increasingly catching up, is therapeutic approaches for loss-of-function variants. So these are ways of increasing SCN8A and NaV1.2 expression to bring the activity level of NaV1.2 back into the normal range. So we recently published a paper called CRISPR activation for SCN8A-related neurodevelopmental disorders. And this is work that we've shared frequently with the SCN8A community. And we get a lot of questions. So one is, people always ask us, what are the takeaways from the paper? What can this be explained to me in plain language? There are also questions about, what does this actually mean for patients and caregivers? Is this just a science experiment? Or is there something that can be taken away? And then lastly, what is specifically for this CRISPR activation approach, what is needed to translate these results into a therapy? And so I'm going to try and address some of these questions today in this talk. So the key results of our work and their implications are, first, we show that restoring SCN8A expression rescues deficits caused by SCN8A haploinsufficiency, even when we do the rescue as late as adolescence, and potentially even further. We just haven't looked past adolescence. And so this tells us that the therapeutic window for treating loss-of-function variants might extend well into development. We might not need to capture begin treatment right at birth or even in utero. We could potentially treat teenagers or beyond. CRISPR activation is a technology that could potentially be used to increase SCN8A expression. And this could then be employed in gene therapies, which should be effective in kiddos with loss-of-function variants. And then lastly, we've demonstrated that we are able to rescue disease-relevant phenotypes in SCN8A mice and human models. And so we have some indication that this rescue itself using CRISPR-A should be therapeutic. So before I talk about what the results show, I just want to give a quick background to what happens to a neuron when you lose NaV1.2 expression in your haploinsufficient. So the neurons fire action potentials. Actually, at first glance, the action potentials look very similar, but what we find is actually they're a little less punchy. And the consequence of that punchiness to the action potential is that the action potential doesn't actually propagate through the neuron in a normal fashion. So in a neuron, a mature neuron, NaV1.6, which is encoded by SCN8A, helps propagate the action potential down the axon. And in a haploinsufficient neuron for SCN8A, that process is still intact. But what is impaired is actually the ability of that action potential to propagate back to the synapses of the neuron. And this is that back propagation signal is an important learning signal for synapses, and when you impair it, you affect the maturity of the synapses, the ability of the synapses to learn. They don't develop correctly. And what we found is we could distribute all of this mechanism by disrupting SCN8A expression late in life. So the deficits were independent of early development. If we knocked out this gene when the mice were at an adolescent stage, all the same deficits reappeared. And that begged the question of, if we were to restore SCN8A expression, could we rescue these deficits? And we think these deficits are particularly crucial to explaining why a sodium channel mutation leads to autism spectrum disorder and intellectual disability in the loss-of-function kids. So to first test this question, we developed a mouse model that enables a perfect rescue of SCN8A haploinsufficiency. So we used a model where we could, the neurons and actually all the cells in the body, in the mouse, are born haploinsufficient, but we could express a gene called Reever recombinase, which would enable the gene to, the mutant allele to be corrected perfectly back to the wild type allele. And what this allows us to do is treat the mice and restore them to the healthy state anytime in development. And so we did this when the mice were adolescent. And when we did this, we were able to rescue the action potentials. So don't worry too much about the exact units on the y-axis, but we were able to rescue the punchiness of the action potentials. We were able to rescue the excitability of the dendrites, so we were able to restore the ability of signals to propagate back from the cell body back out into the dendrites to provide that learning signal to the synapses. And then when we looked at the synapses themselves, we found that they had normal maturity. So they had all the properties that we expected of a healthy synapse, despite the fact that for the first month of life for this mouse, it was haploinsufficient. And so we think this is actually, beyond the specific results of this paper, I think this is the most important thing, is that restoring SCN8A expression in adolescence, regardless of the approach that you take, should be therapeutic. And there are tons of different technologies that are being developed that could potentially do this. So rescue does not need to be in early development. Anything that increases expression could have therapeutic potential. So we were able to restore deficits in this mouse line, but of course, this required a special type of mouse. It's not directly translatable into a therapeutic approach. What is a therapy that could do something similar? So when I was at UCSF, there was a lab that was developing a new technology called CRISPR activation. And it is a technology that is able to precisely modulate gene expression. So in the case of loss of function SCN8A children, there is one wild type allele that functions normally, and then there's a loss of function allele. And that results in 50%, give or take, of the NaV1.2 protein. And this technology, and I'll explain it a little bit more in more detail in the next slide, effectively what it is trying to do is take that remaining healthy copy and push the expression to be twice as much. And so if you can express the gene twice as much, you should get more than 50% of the protein, ideally 100%. And that should restore proper functioning of NaV1.2 in that cell. So how does this work? So the CRISPR activation system that we used has two components. So very similar to the base editing technology that was just spoken about earlier, we use a deactivated form of Cas9 where it can bind to DNA, but it can't cut it. So this is a non-editing form of Cas9. And we bind it to a transcriptional activator. So this is a protein that helps recruit the transcriptional machinery that drives gene expression. And so when we pair that with a guide RNA molecule, so this is a sequence of RNA that is programmed to take that Cas9 protein and put it precisely somewhere in the genome, we can use that guide RNA to bring it to the promoter of SCN8A. And by bringing that VP64 activator domain to the promoter of SCN8A, we can boost its expression. And we've shown or we've been able to screen a variety of these guides that work well on both mouse and human. The next question is, how do you deliver it? And we briefly touched on delivery. In our case, we are using adeno-associated viruses, or AAVs. This is the workhorse of modern gene therapy right now. AAVs are non-pathogenic, non-integrating viruses that have been engineered to deliver genetic cargo to neurons and other cell types. They're used in currently FDA-approved gene therapies, and even though they have a limited packaging capacity, it is possible to fit all the elements of a CRISPR activation system into one virus. In this case, we actually used two viruses just so that we could have additional experimental control to understand which cells were being affected and which ones weren't, but in theory, this can all fit in one vector. So when we delivered this to mice, we did an experiment where we would inject one side of the brain with the CRISPR activation components, and then we would compare the neurons on one side of the brain to the neurons on the other side of the brain that weren't treated. And what we found is similar with that mouse where we could get perfect rescue of SCN8A, we could boost the expression of SCN8A with the CRISPR activation system. We could rescue the action potentials. We could rescue the dendritic excitability, and we could rescue the synapses. So we were able to get measures that show that everything that we were seeing that was impaired in these mice was being pushed in the right direction and restored. And so this gave us a potentially viable way of treating deficits caused by SCN8A haploinsufficiency. We also worked to apply this to mice, to human neurons. So using neurons that are derived from stem cells. So we culture these neurons with specific factors that turn these stem cells into neurons. There's a particular line that was shared with us that is haploinsufficient for SCN8A. We could use the CRISPR activation machinery to both increase the expression of SCN8A, but also importantly rescue electrophysiological deficits in these neurons. So these, in a dish, these neurons are hypoexcitable, and then when we add the CRISPR activation machinery, they become more excitable, more similar to the wild-type neurons. We also asked whether or not we could rescue a clinically relevant deficit. So I've been talking a lot about niche learning mechanisms within the neuron, which, while we think are important, are only part, they're a sort of a foundational component to the broader SCN8A haploinsufficiency phenotype. And some of the patients with SCN8A loss of function variants have intractable seizures. And what we found is that the SCN8A mice, when we challenged them with a drug called 4-aminopyridine, had greater seizure activity than wild-type mice challenged with the same drug, which we think is a potential model for the seizure susceptibility that children with SCN8A loss of function variants face. And what we found is that systemically treating these mice with our CRISPR activation components was able to restore the sensitivity to this drug back to wild-type levels. And so we think that this is a good predictor of this approach being effective in reducing the seizures that some of these children face. Lastly, there's a question of what happens if we overexpress SCN1A, or SCN8A, excuse me. And so an ideal rescue would bring us back to normal expression levels, but of course there's the risk if we overshoot. And given that gain of function variants result in epilepsy as well, if we overshoot, maybe we'll move past this ideal middle range and cause more harm than good. Thankfully, we could test this, at least in mice, using wild-type mice, where the CRISPR activation system can push expression beyond wild-type levels, where we get between 75 and 100% of wild-type levels when we treat the mice. And so if this was going to cause problems, we would expect that these mice would exhibit seizures and hyperexcitability. And thankfully, that's not what we observe. When we look at models where we reduce SCN8A, we see that the cells get less and less excitable in terms of this exponential punchiness metric. And you'd expect that this would linearly extrapolate to increasing SCN8A, making the cells more excitable. We don't see that. Additionally, when we look for seizure activity, we don't see any abnormal EEG activity, activity in both wild-type and heterozygous mice with and without the CRISPR-A treatment. And then when we challenge those mice with a different proconvulsant drug, this one called PTZ, we don't see any difference between the treated and untreated wild-type mice. So we think this is because there's a limited amount of NaV1.2 permitted within the membrane, so you can reduce below that amount, but it's hard to push above it. And so that's sort of a built-in safety factor for this approach. One consequence of this hypothesis is correct is that this might make this approach only relevant for protein truncating variants and not loss of function missense variants, because if we upregulate both copies, they will compete. So there's good and bad to this finding. So these are the key results. Just once again, we find that restoring SCN8A expression can rescue all the deficits that we've been able to observe in mice, even when rescued in adolescence. So this tells us that we might have a broader therapeutic window than we initially feared. This is increasingly being shown for Dravet syndrome with SCN1A. And my hope is that that would apply to the SCN8A community for the kids with loss of function variants. CRISPR activation is a viable technology for treating haploinsufficient disorders, as demonstrated here with SCN8A. And it's, at least in animal and human cell models, it it is effective at restoring disease-relevant deficits. So right now, I'm at a company called Regal Therapeutics. We're working to translate this work into actual therapies that can be given to kids. We are using a platform where we, this is sort of the high-level spiel. We're trying to treat any haploinsufficient disorder. Right now, we're starting with CNS issues or disorders, but this, in theory, should apply to muscular dystrophies, metabolic disorders, cardiomyopathies. There's over 450 genes that this is applicable to. And the underlying technology is the elements that I just talked about today. So we have our Cas modulator that's packaged within an AAV, and then we pair this with a cell type specific regulatory element just to make sure that we are only intervening in the cells that are affected by the disorder. So in the case of SCN8A and SCN8A, that would be, we want to keep the therapy just expressing within neurons and not the rest of the body. We think that this approach, by doing tissue-specific, cell type-specific, and gene-specific modulation, will lead to precision therapies that will be both safe and effective. And right now, we're furthest along on our program for Dravet syndrome, which is SCN8A haploinsufficiency. We're also developing it for SCN8A haploinsufficiency based on the work that I just presented. And hopefully, if those programs continue to progress, we can bring in SCN8A haploinsufficiency as well. So this is this work is sort of the tip of the spear of a long process of basic research that is only now starting to translate into the clinic, and so the path to effective therapies is accelerating, as you've seen from the other talks today. Yeah, I want to thank the huge number of people that were involved in this work. It involved the collaboration of many labs, the work of many generations of scientists within those labs, and sustained investment in basic research. So, thank you.
Time for questions, Ian.
Thank you, great talk. I have two questions. One is maybe simple, and I don't know, but can you use the same method to reduce promoter activity?
Yeah, you can use a it's called CRISPR inhibition. So you take that module that is promoting gene transcription, and you switch it out for a module that suppresses gene transcription.
So there's modules that do that also?
Yeah.
And then the second question is, how long will this, when you apply this treatment, how long does it last?
The goal is for it to be a one-time treatment that lasts indefinitely.
So the CRISPR would stick there and
exactly
for a long time, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the benefits to using AAVs within neurons is that neurons are non-dividing. So the system, in theory, could be permanently in place.
Oh, I see. It's going to keep producing the CRISPR. Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? One more.
That's great talk. Thank you very much. How could we transform that to be allele specific of the wild type?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We don't have a good approach now. You would have to, with the way we're currently designing it, you would have to take advantage of SNPs that are like specific to one allele or the other in the promoter. And currently, we haven't identified any allele specific. We haven't the flexibility we have in placing the system isn't great enough to target known SNPs in the regulatory regions. In theory, it could be paired with an ASO that could be allele specific, but that's speculative at this point.
Okay, thank you, Perry. Let's give a round of applause to all the speakers. I think it's very exciting work.
Thank you so much. Those are wonderful presentations. I would now like to introduce Marcio Souza, President and CEO of Praxis Precision Medicines. He will provide us an update on the EMBOLD study.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Very bright. Thanks much, Kacie. I'm actually going to ask, we're kind of, I don't know if we're one day too early or too late, but I'll ask Caeley to explain a little bit why we're going to give a verbal updates about the study. It's very exciting, actually, on what's happening, and tomorrow we're going to be showing a lot of the results, but maybe first we're going to pare down here a little bit, both of us, and thank all of you.
Hi, I'm Caeley. I've met many of the families in the room, and Marcio just asked me to come up here with him, and I'm honored. But I'll say I got into drug development about 10 years ago when my son Connor was diagnosed with an SCN8A mutation because I was desperate for some sort of treatment for him. The currently available anti-seizure medications did not work. And over the last few years with relutrigine and the EMBOLD study, I've gotten really close to the SCN8A community, specifically the Cute Syndrome Foundation. This foundation has been a true partner for Praxis in every meaning of the word partner. We collaborate often, and Kacie gives us a lot of feedbacks from families in the trial. To make a long story short, to start with, we were doing an interim data cut of the second cohort in EMBOLD, and we just released yesterday. We are actually stopping the study due to such tremendous efficacy, and all patients in the double blind are going to move over to open label and get relutrigine, and actively working with the FDA on next steps for a new drug application. And yeah, yes. Yes, and when I heard this news yesterday, I knew we were doing an interim data cut, and I was hoping that the results would be similar to the first cohort. But when I heard it was this phenomenal, the first thing I did is pick up the phone and call Marcio, and I had tears in my eyes because, you know, my son had a trial off of 13 different anti-seizure medications, right? Tried and failed and tried and failed. And if there was something like relutrigine when he started first having seizures, potentially not having the thousands of seizures he experienced over the years. And really, when I got into drug development with my son and kids like yours as the passion, all I ever wanted, like the vision that I held so close, was the opposite of the diagnosis that happened for me. I was told my son had an SCN8A mutation. We don't know much about it. I'm sorry. It was more of an apology. I want the next generation of kids, you have an SCN8A or an SCN8A mutation, and we have a treatment for that, right? Like, that's what we want, and we're closer to that now with relutrigine. And you know, with the 8A community, we've done so many community meetings and so much education on here's the mechanism of action, here's why it's different, here's the trial opportunity, and really allowed families to ask us in real time anything that was on their mind. And, you know, it was really a conversation of like, why are you considering this? Why aren't you considering this? What are some of your fears about trying this? And learning that I'm scared it might make my child worse, or I'm scared, you know, it might not work, or I'm scared to try something that isn't yet FDA approved. And it was just a conversation and more information. And, you know, especially I think of some of the families, there were like over 20 families in our trial that relocated from all over the world to the United States to be able to try this medication. And at Praxis, we got to assist these families in doing that. And I don't know, when I think of this program, I've put so much like love and passion and connected with all of you that this is just like such a special day. And to all of the families that have been a part of this trial or that came to some of our meetings and webinars and asked questions, like, thank you so much, because in order to bring new drugs to patients, we have to have families enroll in clinical trials. There's no way around that. So thank you for your trust. Thank you for your bravery. And we all did this together. I had no idea I would have all this to say.
I guess that's why I knew that she was the one who had to deliver the news here. It's very emotional, right? We work very closely together. I heard the talk. I really hope every therapeutic approach that was discussed today works. I hope not only that relutrigine is going to help a lot of patients, but actually that becomes irrelevant in the future because we no longer have to deal with the difficulties in every day with any of the genetic conditions that we have to deal with or non-genetic. But for the time being the first therapy being developed specifically for this community, I think it's a real big deal. It's not because it's us. Just like Caeley, I don't do this because of motivation for a lot of other people do. I do really believe in helping patients. I really believe, like my son is a CNS patient as well, so I really believe in this, and I just want to thank you all. Having said that, and always tomorrow at noon we're going to present the results. So you're probably anxious to see the specifics as well. We're going to be showing not only the seizure reductions, but which I'm actually incredibly excited about, as you're going to see tomorrow, is contrary to what of the beliefs we had, and I think a lot based on some of the discussions. And Josh had read your paper before. I don't know where you are. But it was a lot of motivation. Thank you so much for the great work that you've done there. A lot of what happens to the brain when you actually normalize firing seems to be way beyond our understanding. And tomorrow we're going to see how there are many other domains that get normalized and improved when you are actually reducing significantly the amount of seizure activity. So we're even more excited about that. And I would just end by saying, we lost patients before this study, people who are in screening that couldn't make today's study. And this is for them as much as it is for everyone else that is here, because hopefully you're never going to have to deal with that again. So thank you so much.
Well, that was exciting. Also, I'm like, ooh, can we stop filling out those seizure logs now? Soon. Okay. Thank you guys so much. Hey, the timing of this, thank you. This has made my night, my week, my year, my life. Thank you. We are actually getting ready to enter a portion of the program where it can be a bit difficult for families. We are going to honor our SCN8A angels. So I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up that if you need to take a moment or your child needs to leave the room, now would be the time. It is my honor to introduce Liz Ramirez, who will be presenting this year's Memorial Moments video. Liz is the mother of SCN8A Angel Will and serves as TCSF's bereavement support and grants advisor.
Good evening, clinicians, researchers, and families. My name is Liz Ramirez, and my son Will lived with an SCN8A genetic disorder and died in 2017 of SUDEP at just the age of 7. Will would have turned 16 years old this November, and we miss him every day. As SCN8A families, we quickly learn how to carry both gratitude and heartbreak in our beings in the same moment, sometimes even in the same breath. We learn that joy and despair can exist simultaneously. Right after my husband, Michael, completed this year's Memorial Moments video, our community lost another child, Gianna, just this past week. So with heavy hearts, we remember Gianna and her family this evening as well. We will now take some time to celebrate and honor, miss and mourn the lives lost to SCN8A in our community with our Memorial Moments video, holding both deep gratitude and grief in our hearts.
As we hold space for the 83 beautiful children we've lost, we are reminded of both the depth of our grief and the strength of our purpose. Even in the midst of heartbreak, the resilience of this community shines through. Families lifting one another up, experts pushing boundaries, and all of us working side by side towards a future with fewer losses and more milestones to celebrate. During dinner, we invite you to view the rotating slideshow, highlighting some of those meaningful moments and victories across our community. We are now going to break for dinner. There are 2 tables right outside in the pre-function area with buffets, and we will see you back in about 30 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed dinner. Feel free to keep eating. The buffet will be out for a while longer, so if you need to go have seconds, we welcome it. But we're going to go ahead and get started, so we're hopefully not here until 10 p.m. All right. It is my honor to introduce Dianely Cabrera and Mackenzie Wardrope. They will present our 2025 Awareness Day video and reveal the theme for 2026. Dianely is the mother of SCN8A Angel Max, and Mackenzie is the mother of SCN8A Warrior Addie. Both have been long-standing volunteers with TCSF and an asset to our community. No, you're fine. Take your time. I decided to ditch the shoes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a table there.
Do you want me to stand here first?
I think we're doing a video first.
Yeah.
From last year. That's us. Oh. Yes. So I believe we're gonna show last year's Awareness Day video for everyone to watch, and the campaign was "I Am."
With Clayton, his first seizure was at 18 hours old, so we were still, and he was our first babe. Sorry, it's like the hardest moment.
We, knew something wasn't right, but kind of on paper, he seemed okay.
And then witnessing one in the Children's Hospital eventually in the next 24-hour period, telling us it was a seizure. I think in the back of our minds we knew what we were probably looking at, but we're in denial.
He's not going to recover from this if he lives like that. It was amazing to me that he did.
When I see my daughter smile, when I hear her giggle, it fills my cup for a week and a half, 2 weeks, a year.
And he will just tuck his head into you, and he's just love. And
Blake is an awesome kid.
He's the best. They make us better people than we would have been without them. I'm beyond grateful for Connor's 12, almost 13 years.
Clayton started school, and it seemed impossible at the time. You know, I was 100% Clayton's world. You know, I remember first day of school, and he had his walker, and he just takes off down the hallway, and there was no bye. It was just, I'm out, and his teacher's like, give me a hug. She's like, it's okay. And I spent that whole first week, I drove to the dollar store across the street, and I just parked my car the whole time he was at school. But, and now it's, I mean, on his speech device, go school, love, goodbye, let's get out of here. But at the time, it seemed huge.
A parent who's committed to a child with SCN8A and is carrying them through to the best of their ability is one heck of a fighter and a warrior, just like their child.
There's something that people who don't live in this world don't understand. They can't understand it. And that is the absolute perfection of our children. They struggle, and their poor little bodies are sometimes just worn ragged. But they're absolutely perfect.
Good evening. Thank you for being here today. We gather as caregivers, clinicians, researchers, and families, each of us connected by a shared purpose and often a shared struggle. Tonight we want to share two stories, two families, two children, two examples of the resilience at the heart of the SCN8A community, and ultimately one message that ties us all together. First, I'd like to take you back 10 years before our first gathering ever took place. Our community was small, searching for answers, grasping for hope. We were told there was no place for us at the table. Two unstoppable women, Hilary Savoy and Julianne Bradish, took that as a challenge. And because of their belief, their fire, and their refusal to accept no, this incredible event was born. I met Dianely at the very first gathering. She walked in with her mom and her beautiful son, Max. Dee shared her dreams for him, dreams of adventure, joy, and experiences every child deserves. She spoke with a fierce tenderness that told us she would stop at nothing to give Max the best life possible. And Max, he embodied that same unstoppable spirit. His eyes were kind, his sounds were sweet, and his hair was iconic. He faced challenges no child should face, yet he loved deeply and he brought joy effortlessly. His bond with his brother Zach was pure magic. One of his final adventures was attending Zach's first Holy Communion. You should not be comforting me. I should be comforting you. He wasn't feeling well, but nothing, absolutely nothing, was going to stop him from being there. He showed up, proud and radiant, because that's who he was. Shortly after, Max earned his wings, but his spirit has never left us. His presence continues to guide us and guide those who love him. His stories continue to strengthen this community. Max remains a reminder that even when the odds are cruel, love, joy, and determination still rise.
Now I would like to tell you about another child whose courage defines what it means to persevere, and that's Addie. Addie is small, but her story is anything but. Living with an SCN8A mutation means her world is shaped by uncertainty, countless seizures, medical decisions no child should endure, and long hospital stays that most adults could not withstand. And yet she fights. Her mom, Kenz, is the definition of strength and emotion. She advocates, she researches, she asks the hard questions, she cries when she needs to, and she keeps going when most people would fall to their knees. She rises again and again because Addie rises. Addie teaches us about presence, about resilience, about love without condition. She reminds us that a diagnosis does not define a child. Strength does, spirit does, family does. Her story pushes us forward, urging us to keep fighting for better treatments, better days, better futures. Every seizure controlled, every hospital stay shortened, every moment reclaimed. These are victories not just on charts, but in childhoods restored. Addie is proof that quiet victories are still victories, and progress, no matter how small, matters.
2 children, 2 families, 2 journeys filled with love and an unimaginable challenge. And yet, both stories share one undeniable truth. We never stopped. Our families never stopped. Our clinicians never stopped. This community never stopped. Through grief, through fear, through exhaustion, through hope, through every single battle, we keep going. Because in the SCN8A community, rising again is who we are.
And that is why this year, the Cute Syndrome Foundation is proud to share the theme for International SCN8A Awareness Day, Unstoppable. Unstoppable reflects the children who fight with a strength far beyond their years. Unstoppable reflects the parents and caregivers who rise every time they're knocked down. Unstoppable reflects the clinicians and researchers who refuse to accept good enough. Unstoppable reflects those who carry in our hearts, like Max, whose legacy pushes us onward. Unstoppable reflects children like Addie, who show us what resilience truly is. 2 stories, 1 message, 1 community. And together we are and always will be unstoppable. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce Dr. David Chapman, Field Medical Director at Lundbeck, presenting Bexicaserin and an investigational therapy for DEEs. David Chapman.
Hi, my name's Dave Chapman, and unlike Max, no one has ever described my hair as iconic. But I would like to take you on a little bit of a journey, the story that is yet to still be told about Bexicaserin and its potential as an investigational therapy for developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. Really quickly, who we are at Longboard. So our world headquarters is based in Copenhagen, Denmark. Our US headquarters is in Chicago. And From a neuro-rare perspective, we have a legacy that we hope to be able to build upon. So clobazam, trade name Onfi, is one of the first medications that was indicated for the treatment of seizures associated with Lennox-Gastaut syndrome. And again, our hope with Bexicaserin is that we can build upon that foundation. So Bexicaserin is an investigational agonist of the 5-HT2C receptor. So there are, 5-HT is 5-hydroxytryptamine or serotonin. There are 14 different receptors that interact with serotonin in the body, and one of them is 5-HT2C. Seizures are brought about by an imbalance between excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmission. Either there is too much excitation or there is not enough inhibition. So 5-HT2C receptors are found predominantly on GABA interneurons. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter found in the CNS. And so when 5-HT2C receptors are activated by Bexicaserin, what that does is it increases the release of GABA. So you're increasing the braking system in the brain. And this is the mechanism by which we believe that Bexicaserin has its anti-seizure effects. The thing that is interesting about this is it is flying a little bit in the face of precision medicine in 2025. This is a mechanism that seems to be potentially impactful across a number of different seizure etiologies. So I'm going to talk really briefly about some data that we have previously generated in the Pacific study. The things that I'd like to highlight here are the inclusion criteria were any sort of developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. So if patients had a certain number of seizures, at least 4 or more per 28 days, and they had developmental plateauing or regression, then they were eligible potentially to participate in this study. So this is the first trial that was designed to be more inclusive of different types of DEEs. So that included LGS or Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, it included Dravet syndrome, SCN8A, SCN8A, CDKL5 deficiency disorder, and others. And what we did was in this initial trial, we had the majority of patients actually on the active compound, so on Bexicaserin. But we had a subgroup that also received, or that instead of Bexicaserin received placebo. So patients were on a stable dose of anti-seizure medications between 1 and 4, and despite being on these anti-seizure medications, they were still having seizures. And so that was the way that they were allowed to be enrolled in the trial. Lastly, these data were just in patients 12 years of age and up, because we only had data on adults and adolescents. And the main thing that we were looking at was to ask the question, did Bexicaserin reduce the number of countable motor seizures found in these patients? From a safety perspective, the main thing that I guess I want to share is that the safety profile was really quite good, and you can see what the most common adverse events were either CNS or GI in nature. So somnolence was the most common adverse event, just being tired. The last thing, in the concomitant medications, so medications that patients were already on, these were the types of anti-seizure medications that you would most commonly find in a patient population that was developmental, that had developmental and epileptic encephalopathy. So the main thing that I want to share here Again, in the blue bar, or I guess the blue line, we have patients treated with Bexicaserin, and then the red line is patients receiving placebo. And what we see is that in that placebo-controlled randomized portion, which is shown by that Pacific trial, randomized control trial, day 75, we see a greater numeric decrease in countable motor seizures in patients on Bexicaserin versus placebo. All patients then had the opportunity to move into an open label extension where they would all receive Bexicaserin. And what we can see is that it's not shown in this graph, but there was dramatic and rapid reduction of countable motor seizures. The earliest time point that we looked was at 1 month, and then that was sustained out through 6 months of this trial, suggesting, again, that the reduction in countable motor seizures was a durable response. And then on your right, total seizures, so this included things that were not just the countable motor seizures, but things like absence seizures or myoclonic seizures. We are now enrolling a phase 3 program. So phase 3 in clinical trial is the largest, most comprehensive data set that we then will take to regulatory authorities such as FDA and worldwide to achieve, hopefully, marketing authorization. So we have 2 trials. We're going to focus just on the Deep Ocean study because that would be the patient population that could potentially include patients with SCN8A related disorder. The primary endpoint, which is what we saw previously, is a reduction in countable motor seizures. The age range has decreased, so we have better data now to support use in younger patients. So that now is down to 2 years of age, and we're looking at almost 100 sites worldwide. Again, we're going to focus exclusively on that DEE other row or column, and onset of seizures must occur before 5 years of age, and they need to have at least one of the following types of seizure because these are the countable motor seizure types. Developmental plateauing or regression also is included to make sure that they're in a patient population that has developmental and epileptic encephalopathy, an EEG that is consistent with DEEs. Again, from a baseline perspective, despite being on an appropriate dose and at least one anti-seizure medication, patients still need to be exhibiting at least 4 countable motor seizures per 28 days. The main things that I think I'm going to share here, first of all, the titration period has been increased from 2 weeks, 15 days, which is what we did in the Pacific study, to 3 weeks. We saw that starting lower and going slower in terms of increasing the dose really made the somnolence less of a barrier for patients. Following that 3-week titration phase, there would then be a 12-week maintenance phase, and the arms would be either standard anti-seizure medications plus Bexicaserin or standard anti-seizure medications plus placebo. And that in this study will be a 1-to-1 ratio. So half of patients will receive Bexicaserin, half will receive placebo. This is maintained for a 12-week period, at which time there is evaluation, and then there is an opportunity for all patients to be enrolled in the open label extension. And that open label extension is our commitment to patients that they will be able to receive access to the medication or to Bexicaserin until there is either marketing authorization or appropriate feedback from marketing or from regulatory authorities. This is just my way of hopefully saying coming soon to a state or city near you. I have 4 kids, and once upon a time, they were 3 and under. So I get, in a very small sense, not quite the same, but a small sense of some of the challenges of travel. I think the main thing that I want to say here is, even if it, if it's several states away, or if, for example, you live in Idaho, but you have family in Florida, we have programs that hopefully try and overcome some of those burdens associated with travel. So please have a discussion with us, and let's see if we can work together if this trial seems like something that might be appropriate for you and your family. To read more about this, you can go to clinicaltrials.gov, or you can contact us at this deepstudies@lundbeck.com. I'll also have a QR code on my final slide that will take you to the deepstudies.com website. And so with that, I just thank you for your dedication to your loved ones, to your dedication to your families. Grateful to partner with you on trying to develop new therapies that will hopefully improve the lives of your loved ones. You've got my contact information. Please give me a call or shoot me a text, whatever is easiest. And if you have questions, I will be happy to address them. Thank you.
Questions in the room?
You bet.
Thank you, David. I am now honored to introduce our second family talk for the evening. Kacie Banks, mother of SCN8A warrior Wyatt, aka the Beastie, and Averley Banks, Wyatt's twin sister. Katie and Averley join us this evening to offer a personal look into their journey as a family living with SCN8A. Come on up. Yeah, I know. It's a lot easier. It's just easier that way, right? Go ahead, baby girl. You're fine, go ahead.
Hello, I am Wyatt's twin sister, Averley, and I wanted to talk to you about the difficulties of having a brother with behavioral issues. I've had to learn that I will always come second in every way, even though my needs are just as important, simply because I have the ability to be patient. I don't get to have both parents at events. I can't have friends over. We rarely get to do movie nights together. And my mom says that the idea of a family vacation leaves her exhausted. When he tries to play with me, he gets overwhelmed and lashes out, usually hurting me. But I still play with him anyways. He demands piggyback rides even though he's bigger, which I managed to give him because he smiles so big. My mom says that she feels guilty because I'm missing out on so much, because of our limitations, and because I don't get to do the things other kids my age do. She always says that it's okay to feel angry and sad, but this is the only life I've ever known. I sometimes wish life was different, but I love Wyatt fiercely. At school, I walk him to class every day before giving him a big hug, not caring in the least who's watching, and I check on him when I can. My mom says maybe it's our twin bond, but we pray it stays this way.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kacie Banks, and I'm Wyatt's mom. This year, I was asked to be a bit vulnerable and talk about Wyatt and some of the difficulties that we've experienced raising a child with his complexities. Wyatt, who we lovingly call the Beastie, and his twin sister Averley, who is here with me this weekend, are the youngest of our 6 kids. Having had so many older children, we honestly thought that we had this parenting thing pretty much figured out by the time the twins arrived, but I don't think anything aside from actually raising Wyatt could have ever prepared us for him. Wyatt, like so many of our kids, has epilepsy. In fact, he has had 6 seizure types to date and has never experienced seizure freedom. In the beginning, managing up to 100 seizures a day was our largest struggle. However, after a few years, that drastically changed as behavior problems started to take center stage. Wyatt was diagnosed with level 3 autism just after his 2nd birthday and has since added PDA, or pathological demand avoidance, to that as well. For those of you that are unfamiliar with that diagnosis, the basic idea is that anytime a demand is placed on Wyatt, his brain automatically sees that demand and the person placing it as a threat and sends him into fight or flight. Let me tell you, the boy has only ever fought, and it's one of the several reasons for his nickname. Asking Wyatt if he needs help or offering to show him how to do something almost always guarantees escalation. And when you want him to do something, you have to present multiple options for him to choose from. If he truly wants something and you try to keep it from him or tell him no, brace for impact. If these basic rules aren't followed, he'll lash out in any way possible to protect himself. Hitting, kicking, biting, hair pulling, it's all fair game. If he's not able to self-regulate, especially when he's escalated like this, so we have to help him de-escalate even while trying to keep both him and ourselves safe. The heartbreaking part is that once he's calm and sees what he's done, he always looks so sad, and it just serves as a reminder that he has no control in these situations. As is common with an autism diagnosis, he also has several comorbidities that add to the chaos. He struggles with severe ADHD and impulse control. He has chronic constipation, which makes him understandably cranky a lot. He suffers from awful anxiety. He has an intellectual disability that cognitively puts him closer to age 6 instead of almost 14. He has had a G-tube since he was 5, and he isn't toilet trained. He has OCD, which often means that when he starts something, he has to finish it, but worse, it also leads to self-harm because things don't feel right. For example, ripping fingernails and toenails completely off because of a snag or a hangnail, but once he starts, he can't stop until the whole nail is gone. Wyatt often stims violently, which leads to his feet being kicked through our walls simply because he craved a little too much pressure, and the dining chairs being broken because he can't seem to stop banging his feet on them. He's very impulsive, which means that a plant will randomly get knocked over, a picture will fly off the wall, he'll push the water button on the refrigerator so he can water the floor, and my favorite, he'll clear an entire counter with his arm, just like in the movies. We call this his orange cat behavior. Wyatt breaks everything, even things that he loves. He just can't help himself. He rips his clothing like the Hulk. He breaks his toys constantly. He broke his safety bed, so I have to sleep in his room with him to make sure that he's safe. And he just got done tearing apart a solid wood loft bed simply because he could. He's broken the kitchen cabinets, more furniture than I can remember. He's shattered more tablets than I can count, and the list goes on. However, the bigger problem is actually his obsession with breaking glass. Because of all of this, we've had to eliminate the vast majority of glass from our house, except for the windows, of course, which have also been broken. So the dishes, light bulbs, nail polish, all the glass in picture frames, even the round glass turntables in the microwave, he's broken 2 of those, are all gone. We haven't gone out to eat as a family in at least 5 years, and taking him out into the community isn't something that we can do very often anymore either. While we do have an adaptive stroller, he's just too big and too unpredictable because he can unbuckle himself. At stores, he gets overstimulated, which results in loud vocal stimming, rocking, swiping things off shelves, and even attempting to kick people that walk past us. We have a pool that he enjoys, and he learned to swim in. The downside is that Wyatt is somewhat of an exhibitionist at heart and prefers to swim in the nude when he thinks that he can get away with it. It's all cute when a 5-year-old little boy is running around naked in his backyard, but not so much when a 5'4", 150-pound 13-year-old is doing it, regardless of how happy it makes him. I'm pretty sure that's public indecency in most places. We started homeschooling in 3rd grade, and with the reduced anxiety, he slowly started speaking at 8 years old. He began with scripting and echolalia, which he still does as a functional form of communication. Outside of scripting, his communication is limited to 1 or 2 words. However, he isn't able to tell us how he feels when he's having a seizure or other important things, nor is he able to always communicate what he needs or what he wants. Understanding why it can be complicated at times because he tends to say things that you would say to him. For example, I can help you when he needs help. What's wrong when he's upset? Or are you okay when he's coming out of a seizure? Wyatt doesn't fully understand emotions, although he tries in his own quirky way. If he thinks someone's happy, he'll typically repeat, she's happy, until you also repeat it back as confirmation. The same goes for any other emotion. However, he did once gag when he saw his sister crying as the tears fell down her face. Tell me you have sensory issues without telling me you have sensory issues. And just last week, when he did something impulsive, I told him that I was angry. His response was to start singing me a song that he learned about taking deep breaths when you're mad. I didn't stay mad for very long. When a 5-year-old throws a tantrum in public, bangs their head on your chest to self-soothe, or wants to sit on your lap, it's widely accepted. This is not so much the case when that child reaches 10, and even less so at 13, when that child is the same size as his mother. Unfortunately, getting the needed services isn't always as simple as it should be. After the military moved us to Florida, we lost all of our support. Family, friends, school, therapies. We were totally isolated. We couldn't do speech or occupational therapy due to behaviors. We sat on a wait list for ABA therapy for more than 3 years, and we even tried private school for autistic children, but were turned down due to his behavior issues and medical complexities. I didn't trust sending him back to public school until middle school when he could be around peers his own size, so we were left looking for help, and constantly being turned away, which begs the question, what are we doing with the older kids that need help? We have so many services for young children, but they seem to age out around puberty, and then services disappear. What do we do with the children like Wyatt who don't seem to fit anywhere, who providers won't see because he's too old, too big, too volatile, too medically complex, too much? He's all of these things because they won't help him, and they won't help him because he's all of these things, which just leaves us spinning in circles and getting absolutely nowhere. How can we have hope for him in a world that refuses to help him be better, but is more than happy to help me institutionalize and sedate him, for my safety and his, of course. On this first day of middle school, I was called within 20 minutes to find Wyatt pinned face down, bent over a table at the waist, with a grown man bracing his body weight on top of him. While Wyatt, completely terrified, was screaming and crying with his arms pinned over his head. Despite their reassurances, the school was wholly unprepared for my child, and he paid a lasting price for it. I'm happy to say that with some very hard work and the help of an amazing team, after 2 years, he's finally going to school full-time in an actual classroom instead of being isolated. He does still pull his G-tube out at least once a week, knowing that I'll have to come put it back in, but hey, he's resourceful. The thing about Wyatt is that he draws you in, and to know him is to absolutely love him. People will do anything to be let into his world, and when they finally are, it's so magical that they don't mind how hard they have to work to stay there. We say that he's like our Sour Patch Kid. First he's sour, but then he's sweet, and those sweet moments are made that much more precious by the journey that he takes us on every single day in an effort to not just survive, but to thrive. I need you all to know that what I've shared here tonight is nowhere near all of who Wyatt is, which is also loving, snuggly, funny, brave, smart, silly, and imaginative. But this wasn't meant to be a highlight reel. So if you have a child with behavior problems and you're wondering if you're alone here, you absolutely are not. I know that there are many of you who, like me, can't take your eyes off your kids because if you do, they'll run, hurt themselves, hurt someone else, break something, put themselves in crazy amounts of danger, perhaps use knives as swords. Those are all hidden now, by the way. And so many other things. SCN8A is so much more than just epilepsy, and to anyone else struggling, just know that you have support here. Thank you for all allowing us to share my sweet boy and some of our world with you.
Thank you, Katie and Averley, for sharing your story and sharing moments of the beastie with us. I would now like to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Ranmal Samarasinji. He is an assistant professor for the Department of Neurology at UCLA, presenting From Cells to Seizures, What Brain Organoids Are Teaching Us About SCN8A Epilepsy. Ranmal was unable to attend this evening, but recorded his presentation. Again, those of you that are attending virtually, please put your questions in the chat. And our moderator for the second set of presentations, Dr. John Schreiber, Associate Chief of Neurology at Children's National Hospital, will help you answer those after Ranmal's presentation.
Thank you to the Acute Syndrome Foundation for this invitation. I really wish I could be there in person, but I'm happy to share some of our work remotely. Just couldn't make it to AES this year. So my lab is interested in using stem cells to understand disease processes in epilepsy, and recently completed a study on SCN8A. And so I'll talk about that, but also more generally about how we can use stem cells to study epilepsies. So my lab's primary goal is to utilize stem cell models, and by stem cell models I really mean these things called organoids, which I'll describe in more detail in a second, to understand how brain circuits form and importantly how they function. And so whether it's organoids or mice or whatever model system that we use to do experiments in the lab, there are some challenges we face with studying human brain disease. And one is illustrated in this image, which is that the human brain is really complex. It's larger than a lot of the model systems we use, including organoids. And at some level, though, we need to be able to recapitulate some of this structural complexity, the anatomy of the brain, because that's important in disease. But of course, for those of us especially who are interested in epilepsy and who read EEGs, et cetera, we know that the brain generates these complex electrophysiological signals, these squiggly lines on a page. These are, what you're looking at here is a standard 16 electrode EEG. And they can tell us a lot about the health of a brain, whether someone is in a disease state, whether someone's having a seizure, or at that moment is relatively healthy, et cetera. And so we want our model system, including our stem cell derived organoid, to ideally be able to generate some of these electrophysiological signals as well. All right, so how do we achieve this? Well, first of all, we start with these things called organoids, and we start initially from a stem cell, in particular a patient-derived stem cell. And so that can include a patient who has DEE13 due to SCN8A gain of function. And this is a picture of an individual stem cell, the round cell in the middle. And that has enormous potential. It can become a brain, it can become a heart, a lung, eyes, a whole person in some cases, of course. But really the problem is, how do you extract all that potential from the cell? And one way you can do it, to some extent, at least for a model that's in the laboratory dish, is through these things called organoids. And so what you're seeing here is a picture of a organoid, which is a three-dimensional kind of brain-like structure that's floating in a dish. And what makes it unique is it does have structure. And so on the outside, you see these lighter regions, which we call rosettes. And the rosettes have cells that are layered, just like a brain, an actual brain, a human brain or an animal brain is layered. Layered meaning different kinds of cells are in different places. Here is a microscope image from my lab showing some blue cells, some red cells, and some green cells. And the key point here is they're in different places. The blue cells first, then some of the red, and then at the top, the green. And that's the way the brain is organized. And that's really important. You can't really achieve this, for example, in other disease in a dish models, like 2D cultures that you can grow when you can just plate neurons in a dish. But with an organoid, you can. Okay, so we do this and we make these organoids. And here is another microscope image just to illustrate the point. This is an organoid from my lab. And it kind of illustrates the point that it's three-dimensional. So you can see some depth to this. You can see different kinds of cells, the red cells and the green cells, which are inhibitory and excitatory, and these yellow glial cells, which are important for many things, including immune function and sort of the health of the organoid overall. Okay, so we make organoids, but then in particular, my lab is interested in making organoids that are also able to generate these, what I described as squiggly lines before, but these electrophysiological activities, like what we get from an EEG. And here are some recent work from our lab going in this direction. In particular, we recently published some work on SCN8A, which I'll describe very briefly in this talk. So how do we do this? How do we get our organoids to make brain rhythms or brain waves? Well, we do this by making these things called assembloids, which is a kind of a fancy term, but all it is putting two organoids together. And doing this makes all the difference because when we do this, we get a more complex organoid or an assembloid that has different kinds of cells, diverse cells that seem to be critically important, at least in our hands, in our lab, to generate brain waves and brain rhythms. And then we can record these. So one way we can do that is we can stick electrodes into them. We can use a microscope to image, which I'll show you. Or we can plate these on these things called microelectrode arrays. And this red arrow is pointing to the particular little organoid or assembly sitting on this microelectrode array, which has about 1,000 electrodes on it. And then we can record from it. And this is a live recording. What you're seeing is these little red flashes. And that's the electrophysiological activity, the electrical activity from the actual assembloid in real time. And when we do this, we see obvious things that suggest disease. So here, this is a different kind of imaging. This is the microscope imaging. I'll play the video in a second, but what you're seeing in white are neurons. And when you see the white get brighter, that's the neuron turning on. And so here's the control, and you can see that the cells kind of come on and off at different times. Whereas in this assembloid, which is from a patient who has DE13 because of SCN8A mutations, you can see that they all kind of fire together. And this obviously looks different, and perhaps the one on the left is abnormal, but clearly it's very different. You can just see that with your eyes. But in our lab, we can obviously observe this, but we want to go beyond this to also look in a little bit more detail at why and exactly how these cells are wired together, because we think this is very important for disease processes. So here's just one example of how in real time, using the same video that you just saw in the previous slide, we can use these mathematical models to make connections, implied connections between cells. And in this way, dig a little deeper in a more granular way, understand how the brain waves in the diseased organoid or assembloid versus non-diseased assembloid are different. Okay, now a little bit of science and the DE13 story. So we use all these approaches, generation of assembloids, these recording techniques to look at DE13. And this all started with a clinical finding or clinical question, I guess, which is something that many of you who have family members with DE13 can probably relate to, and as a clinician I can, which is sometimes the symptom that's most important to the patient isn't really the seizure, if the seizures are well controlled, but other things, like maybe behavior or sleep or learning, et cetera. And so our question was, well, does SCN8A in this case, does it affect the parts of the brain that may be causing these different comorbidities in the same way or in different ways? Another way of putting this is, for example, is the brain region that's most important for learning and memory, is it affected by SCN8A mutations in the same way as the part of the brain that may be more important for higher order thinking or for motor memory or for motor activity, et cetera, the cortex? And the reason we can address this with organoids or assembloids is we can make different brain regions. So we can make a hippocampus-like organoid or assembloid or cortex-like assembloid. And we can make it from the patients, from patients who have SCN8A. And we did this. And so here's the basic finding for at least the electrophysiology part. And in blue, you can see these recordings that we're taking from controls, so healthy assembloids, versus the patient. And without getting into too much of the nitty-gritty detail, the red and the blue look clearly different. And the finding here is that essentially in the patient-derived assembloids for cortex, it's very hyperexcitable. You get a lot more firing. So these are electrophysiologic recordings. It's happening more frequently. The amplitudes are higher. You don't see these nice oscillations, which is what I've had this oval around in the blue. And when we do the recordings using a microscope, which I showed earlier, you see once again these flashes of synchronized activity in the patients, but not in the controls. And this is just quantification of. So, okay, so the cortical assembloids from patients who have DE13 look very hyperexcitable. What about the hippocampal assembloids? And this is where the story got interesting. The hippocampal assembloids didn't look so obviously different between controls and the mutants with the SCN8A mutation, at least by this measure. So here's just a reminder of what the cortex looked like on the bottom. Red and blue are really different. At the top, you have one patient and one control, and they don't look like different, the red and the blue, and the black and the brown are two other patients and controls, and once again, they don't look super different. But this isn't the whole story. When we dug a little deeper and looked at the hippocampus in more detail, it turns out the hippocampus isn't exactly normal in DE13, as you'd expect. It's just not as abnormal as we expected. Excuse me, I should say it's not abnormal in the way we expected. So here we take our DE13 hippocampal assembloids, we are recording from them using these electrodes. We're just sticking these in there and we're recording electrical activity. And when we quantified electrical activity, in the healthy assembloids, you see a certain pattern of activity. And this is quantified here by this red linear kind of monophasic streak of coupling of activity. Whereas in the epilepsy case, in the SCN8As, you can see that it's all over the place. You don't see this nice red streak, what I've boxed in red on the left. But what was also interesting in our finding is, well, we were thinking, okay, this is what we're seeing in an assembloid. What about a patient with epilepsy? Because we also make these recordings in patients, although not always using electrodes, but in some cases we do. So here we had to turn to adult patients where we do in fact put electrodes to measure hippocampal activity. And we found a similar trend. So on the left, we're seeing a healthy patient, and you see that kind of monophasic linear red streak in the hippocampus, whereas in a temporal lobe epilepsy, so not SCN8A because we don't have SCN8A data, but for a temporal lobe epilepsy adult patient, you see the same disorganized pattern of activity. Now we did a lot more in the study. We tried to understand why this was going on, why the cortex and the hippocampus are different. And we basically found that we think that there are certain cell types that are differentially effective, meaning that certain kind of cell in the hippocampus is really vulnerable in SCN8A, whereas it's not so much in cortex. And that leads to big differences in how the hippocampus and the cortex seem to develop and in terms of the activity patterns that we record from them. But I won't get into that. I'll just end with big picture. What are we thinking about here? Well, one thing is so we can get these stem cells from patients who have specific diseases like SCN8A related DE13. You can make these assembloids and you can study disease mechanisms, and that's what I primarily do in my lab. But we also imagine a future where we can use these as sort of a complementary platform, complementary to animal platforms, for example, for drug screening. And in particular, since we're really focused on physiology, we can relate that hopefully back to the human patient's physiology. So for example, from a specific patient, we might have an EEG. We can make an assembloid from that patient. We can screen for drugs and look at their physiology. And if we can correct it in the organoid, perhaps we can correct it in the patient. This is sort of the dream and where we'd like to go in terms of a kind of a clinical avenue for the work. But we're not there yet, certainly. But that's why we are sort of developing these tools while we go along. So that's all. Thank you so much for your time. This work has been supported by a lot of folks, including Cure Epilepsy, the SCN8A Alliance, AES, many others. And some of the people who've done the work are also highlighted on this screen. So thank you very much.
Nope, I don't think it's, oh, there, okay, there it is. Hi, so I think I heard that there may be an opportunity for questions online.
So would patients who have like another variant of unknown significance, like a TUB2A, which kind of shows it up as cortical dysplasia or tubulinopathy, would that actually be a possible cause for loss of function, amplification of symptoms, if that makes sense? Because of where the malformation is in the brain?
Is he available online? Give it a minute. Nothing. Okay.
Well, write your question down for me, and we'll get it to you afterwards.
Okay.
Oh, he is online.
Oh, good, okay.
Wow, that's very cool. We'll have it the other way. We'll have the live question here, and then let's see if we can have him type it in the chat. So if you can repeat your question, that'd be great.
I don't know if I can say it again. Okay, so my SCN8A kiddo is loss of function, but he also has a TUB2A variant of unknown significance. But that TUB2A was discovered because the cortical dysplasia, which is not cortical dysplasia, but they're calling it a malformation in that area of the brain. Is that a possibility of why his loss of function symptoms are intensified, or his comorbidities for the SCN8A are presenting the way that they are?
I'm going to walk the mic back to the chat, and I know some of these questions are really complex, so yeah, it might take a while to type out the answer to that, so we will get back to you if there is anything in the chat.
I think, you know, one thing I can say about other variants, it's pretty common to have other variants, often variants of uncertain significance on like a panel, if you've had testing, and that's we very frequently see that. A lot of times, we don't think those things are really going to contribute significantly to somebody's epilepsy, but sometimes they may. It can be hard to distinguish that. Michael Hammer has some data presented, I think, like a couple of years ago, that the patients that also have additional variants of uncertain significance, their clinical phenotype can be a bit harder to predict. So those things could potentially be at play. In some cases, it's hard to know. Not sure if that helps at all, but I think hopefully the answer in the chat might be better than mine. Any other questions? Okay, we can, I guess, move on to my talk. Okay, so this is me. I'm at Children's National. I've been coming here now for a while. I'm really, it's one of my favorite parts of AES, so very honored to be back here to talk and present on SCN8A consensus guidelines, of which we have several authors here in this room. I am not the first or last author, but you're getting me anyway, so we can go on to the next slide. We do have the first author here in the room. You can move on. Oh, can I can, okay, I can move myself. Let's see here. Okay. All right, so as mentioned, this is work from a lot of people, several of them who are here in the room. Gabby Conacher is the first author on this. But this, you know, in hearing stories from families, I think this is actually a great example of how we can come together as clinicians, researchers, advocates, families, to really advance the care for SCN8A related epilepsy and other neurodevelopmental disorders, because this really represents a truly collaborative effort. And a lot of this is based on just, you know, us working together and coming together at meetings like this. So as you know, this is the background on SCN8. I can skip through this. We talked about comorbidities and the underlying etiology. There's a broad phenotypic spectrum. Our understanding of the phenotype here is evolving somewhat. This is some of the sort of initial concept of SCN8A, ranging from milder to a more severe phenotype. But what's actually probably happening, we know now, is that there's some patients with more of a loss of function and some with more of a gain of function. I think traditionally we think of SCN8A related epilepsy as presenting with more gain of function, but there can be mixed functional effects, and there also are patients obviously with loss of function that can present with seizures, although a somewhat different phenotype. Treatment, we know from talking with many of the folks in this room and understanding about history, and Dr. McKee will talk some about their experience at CHOP. We know that sodium channel blockers tend to work best, but that's often not sufficient to control seizures, and other therapies can be helpful. One thing we've also noticed, and that several of you have described, is that levetiracetam can frequently make people worse. So we convened this panel and went through a modified Delphi process to first, by reviewing literature, we drafted questions. There were 3 groups that did so based on diagnosis and phenotypes, treatments, and then prognosis and comorbidities. We piloted 3 rounds of surveys. There was a review panel that gave input, and then we identified areas of consensus and areas that may needed some more refinement, and completed 3 rounds of an iterative process to come up with these consensus guidelines. And the leadership team prepared the draft manuscript that was then reviewed by the panel. So here is the sample of clinicians, researchers, caregivers, and number of years of treating SCN8A, the total patients they've treated, and overall familiarity with SCN8A and the age of a caregiver's child here. And you can see that they represented several different countries, many from the US, but also from countries around the world. So again, the topics discussed included how you make the diagnosis, understanding phenotypes, treatments, and then counseling. These questions were rated on a Likert scale of you fully disagree all the way up to you fully agree with a statement. And consensus was considered strong if at least 80% fully agreed, moderate if 80% fully or partially agreed and less than 10% disagreed, and modest if 67 to 79% fully or partially agreed and less than 10% disagreed. The total responder rate was more than 50% was required to calculate a consensus, and for phenotype-specific questions, only caregivers only rated their child's phenotype. So these are the results. First, kind of going over the diagnosis perspective. These are cases for genetic testing. There was strong consensus that all cases of drug-resistant epilepsy less than 3 years old without a clear cause warranted genetic testing. That genetic testing should include an epilepsy panel, or whole exome sequencing, or whole genome sequencing, and this really also corresponds to guidelines that have been published by the National Society for Genetic Counselors. We also recommend that families with newly diagnosed SCN8A-related disease should see a geneticist for counseling for a number of reasons. We also went over the importance of early diagnosis, didn't achieve strong consensus on any of these things for clinicians, did achieve some for caregivers. First, that early diagnosis improves clinical outcomes and can improve seizure outcomes. So there was some consensus there. So next on to features related to loss of function variants. We've talked about some of these things before, so autism without epilepsy, developmental delays or movements without epilepsy, lack of response to sodium channel blockers were all considered strong, had strong consensus as being related to loss of function. Areas of counseling at or soon after diagnosis, so things that families want to know, is that there is a wide spectrum of severity. The expected presence and evolution of comorbid conditions, including movement disorders and other challenges, need for a seizure action plan or seizure rescue, risk of SUDEP, were things that reached strong consensus by clinicians, but you can see all the different important aspects of counseling listed there. And this is a busy slide, but this kind of goes over the different phenotypes and how we see it present. So as mentioned before, there's a severe DEE that presents very early on with multiple different seizure types that are very difficult to control. It also carries a risk for many different comorbid conditions. There's a mild or moderate DEE that presents a little bit later and can have milder seizures and better developmental outcomes. There's self-limited familial or non-familial infantile epilepsy, again, milder presentation. although it also presents early on. And then NDD with or without epilepsy, or with or without generalized epilepsy, that presents later on. So these different phenotypes reached strong consensus for the most part. The optimal first-line treatments by phenotype, you can see here, there was moderate consensus that we use sodium channel blockers like oxcarbazepine or carbamazepine, not just for severe DE, but for other types, gain of function type phenotypes. And gain of function versus loss of function, we again noted that those sodium channel blockers are preferred for patients with gain of function. Poorly tolerated medications include levetiracetam, and in cases of loss of function, people should use caution in using sodium channel blockers. We also talked about the number of anti-seizure medications used. We generally like to limit number of anti-seizure medications if we can to no more than 3 or 4. And then these are scenarios in which we would add another anti-seizure medication, particularly for prolonged seizures or status, frequent convulsive seizures, and the factors to consider when you're determining which medications to add or which medications to remove is the efficacy and side effects most strongly. I'm going to move through some of this here. You can see here as far as other non-anti-seizure medication treatments, generally there's not a role for resective surgery in SCN8A related epilepsy, but you can consider other types of treatments, including dietary therapies and other non-resective surgical options, things like neuromodulation. Emergency medications, phenytoin and fosphenytoin are probably preferred therapies after failing first-line benzodiazepines. We should probably avoid levetiracetam. Vaccinations, there was moderate consensus that vaccinations should be given either per the usual schedule or with an amended schedule, and patients should have a seizure action plan and make sure they're providing appropriate education to their families. Okay, here's all different kinds of comorbidities based on phenotype. So this is for severe DEE. You can see here that there was a good consensus for several of these different comorbidities, that many patients do have severe comorbid disorders. And if they change over time, in many cases, they either worsen or remain stable or can be mixed. For the less severe phenotypes, the comorbidities are often less severe. An exception for that was on autism and intellectual disability, but you can see here the range of comorbidities and the change over time. Again, just a listing of comorbidities in self-limited infantile epilepsy. Okay, getting towards the end here. So resources to be provided to families. Again, this is really critical. As mentioned before, oftentimes seizures are not the most disabling feature of SCN8A. It can be all the behavioral problems, sleep issues, hypotonia, all kinds of other risk for infections. There were several additional interventions that were recommended here in the consensus guidelines you can see listed. All right, and as far as prognosis, the severe DEE in general, most people felt there was moderate consensus that cognition and development would have some deterioration or limited change for that severe DEE, whereas you could see some more improvements for some of the less severe phenotypes. Also, seizure freedom was very unlikely for severe DEE, but you could have some seizure freedom for those more mild phenotypes. So we also identified several research gaps. One, we don't know a whole lot about how the movement disorders present. Sleep disturbances, I think, are under researched. There's autonomic dysfunction, GI comorbidities, cortical vision impairment, SUDEP risk, pulmonary risks, and probably need more or better characterization of the selfie phenotype and an examination of overall comorbidities beyond the severe DEE. Limitations, this is expert recommendation, this is class 4 evidence. There may be some confirmation bias, particularly with the phenotypes. Not all clinicians had experience with the full range of phenotypes. There were limited caregiver respondents for each phenotype, and consensus may lag a bit behind the most up-to-date findings. This is just a summary slide of all those recommendations based on these consensus guidelines, which I won't go through. I've gone through a lot of this already, but a really nice way. And I think this paper is getting a lot of buzz and has been referenced a lot. I think that's one of the goals was to, these are a lot of things that I think we know. I think for people in this room, several of these things may seem somewhat obvious, but it's not for the broader community and the community of people that are treating SCN8A related disorders. So I think we're seeing these be adopted more and more and referenced more and more in the literature. So thank you for your time. I'll take questions.
Okay, so bear with me, but towards the end you were talking about the research gaps with movement disorders. So my daughter has ataxia all the time, but she has episodes where her ataxia is significantly worse to the point where she is wheelchair bound. Also affects speech, yada yada. I know that there was in the last Zoom call, I think, Kacie, you were there. I know. Hi, Kacie. And it was talking about a possible watch to wear to track like the movements. Are there any future studies that we can look forward to? Because, as a family, we want to know, like, is the ataxia going to progress a lot more, right? Like, there's so many questions unanswered, and, our kids, please study her, know.
No, that's a great point. Ataxia in our clinic, I think, like behind hypotonia was the most common sort of movement phenotype. And really, it was almost there universally for kids, except with the selfie phenotype. If kids were ambulatory, they often did have ataxia. It's interesting what you described and that it can fluctuate. And we do sometimes see ataxia can occur more after seizures. So there may be some association, some link there. I think it'd be great to study. I don't know if anyone is actually doing this, but now we do have more wearables. There may be more devices, to your point, that can kind of track this, and we can actually get some real-world data on these movement phenotypes. But it really is an important area of research we need to explore, and really can have a significant impact on someone's sort of functional abilities. Yeah.
So for those of us who are like the only ones with our variant, how would you go about researching that if we are the research, we are the test studies? Me and my daughter are the only two with our variant.
Well, I think we do see, there's so many variants, I think it's going to be hard to study in a very rigorous way every single variant, at least like with the tools that we have now. It may be, sometimes the variants can, depending on their location, they may have a similar functional effect. The amino acid change, they may have a similar functional effect. But it's really going to be difficult, I think, to study every single variant. And we even find, though, there are certain variants that present a certain way, right? There are some that present with severe DEE almost universally, and others that are selfie all the time. And there are some that really can be quite variable. And we still don't know why that is. Are there other genetic factors at play? Are there environmental factors? Is it medication related? We just don't know the answer to all that yet. Excuse me. It's not a great answer, sorry. Okay, well, we'll move on to our next speaker, Dr. Jillian McKee. She is coming to us from CHOP, where she studies epilepsy genetics, works a lot with SYNGAP, and has also worked and published a lot on SCN8A and using real-world data to look at disease trajectory. So very excited to have her here with us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much for having me here to speak tonight. It's great to be back. As John mentioned, I'm a pediatric epileptologist at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I'm here today to talk to you about how we can leverage real-world data to help understand the natural history of SCN8A. So brief outline of what I'm hoping to share with you guys tonight. I want to help understand the longitudinal disease histories of SCN8A. How can we really nail down the natural history of the disorder, including neurodevelopmental phenotypes, separated by recurrent variants and different functional consequences of those variants, and then developmental milestone acquisition. How can we define the epilepsy trajectories and anti-seizure medication effectiveness? And then finally, I'm going to share something a little bit new that we've been working on is leveraging administrative insurance claims data to get a much broader population of individuals with SCN8A to help really look at the phenotypes and different recurrent variants when you really can leverage those numbers. So first, why do we care about disease trajectories? So putting my clinician hat on, I care because it helps me talk to families, helps give everyone an idea of what to expect in the future, can help with clinical management, deciding which medications to try and when. And then putting more of my clinical researcher hat on, it's really helpful for understanding and getting SCN8A clinical trial ready. How do we help define what outcome measures we really care about, what is going to be effective, and what's going to show a change with a disease-modifying therapy. So when I think about the natural history, I think of really two big buckets in the ways we can assess this. And the first is the classical gold standard way, is a prospective natural history study. This is the gold standard for understanding how disease trajectories change over time, where you do standardized clinical assessments. You can assess the appropriateness of different assessments and scales as outcome measures for a clinical trial. But these can be very expensive and time-consuming. So I'm actually not going to talk about that at all today. What I'm going to talk about tonight is how we can leverage retrospective real-world data to understand natural history. And this approach leverages data gathered through routine clinical care. It can be plagued by missing data, and data that's recorded at very different levels of detail. Like you see two different neurologists and they record your symptoms using different language, and how do we harmonize that? But this is really fast, and the data is already there. And especially in rare disease, I think it's critical to make use of everything we already have. So let's start by talking about longitudinal disease histories. So we have a harmonization problem. This is just actually a very old figure at this point that I show many, many times, looking at like over 1 million neurology notes at CHOP and over 100,000 individuals. And this is a lot of data. How do we understand this? How do we find patterns in this data? So in my work, we do computational phenotyping using something called the human phenotype ontology. And this is a hierarchical dictionary of clinical terms that helps you understand how different phenotypes are related to each other. So when you see two different doctors, they might name your symptoms using slightly different language, and the HPO lets you understand that those are talking about the same thing, so we can really understand how individuals are similar and how they're different. And when you're talking about phenotyping, there's many different approaches. So I already mentioned the natural history studies, which are very, very, very detailed analyses. But because of the burden on families, you can really only do that in a small number of individuals. And then it ranges all the way up to very large-scale phenotyping analysis, which you can do in a large number of individuals, but it's very superficial. So there's always a trade-off between sample size and the data granularity you're going to get from these studies. So we're trying to approach this by combining data across these different levels. So things I'm going to talk to you about tonight are using data from 3 different levels of scale and granularity. So at the largest sample size and the most superficial data, we have insurance claim data. In the middle, we have data from the Citizen Health Registry, which is curated electronic medical record data. And then at the most fine-grained but smallest number of individuals, we have our patients that we follow locally at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So a lot of this work I'm going to talk to you about tonight has already been published in neurology, and a lot of it was done by Jan Magilski, who is a student who worked with us, who's now moved on to med school, so that's always great when people we work with advance in their career. And I also want to acknowledge that this work was funded by a Rare Epilepsy Partnership grant funded by the Cute Syndrome and by Cure Epilepsy. So using data from the Citizen Health Registry and our local cohort at CHOP, we're able to extract over 130,000 phenotypic terms in 82 individuals across a total of over 600 patient years. And what I'm showing you here is just an idea of the scope of this data. So each row in this graph is an individual patient, and each dot is an entry in the electronic medical record. So all of that is data that we can extract and use to understand the natural history of SCN8A. So here, first pass look at this data. What I'm showing here is different phenotypes and whether they're present or absent in 3-month time bins across the lifespan in kids with SCN8A. So the overall contour of these plots shows you the amount of data we have at every time point, and then the color tells you whether the phenotype was present in red or absent in blue. And what you can see is that these time-stamped phenotypes reveal that there's an early preponderance of seizures, developmental differences, hypotonia, and GI differences. Next, we wanted to compare the phenotypic features in SCN8A to a broader cohort of individuals with other DEEs to try to get a sense of what is the unique fingerprint of SCN8A. And here there's a number of features that popped out as very significant in SCN8A, but the most critical one seems to be these really early and really enriched phenotype of bilateral tonic-clonic seizures. Next, we wanted to look separately for individuals with either gain-of-function variants or loss-of-function variants. And what you can see here is that gain-of-function variants seem to be associated with early and severe DEE phenotypes, which is probably not surprising to anyone in this room. You see a lot of the green dots are high up with early seizure phenotypes, developmental delay. And then for loss-of-function kids, we tend to see a rise in absence seizures after about 4 years of age. Electronic health record data is really good at getting at developmental milestones as well. So here on the right side, I'm showing the proportion of individuals who have achieved a certain developmental milestone, such as most people have the ability to vocalize, down to less than 20-ish% have the use of verbal communication, and about like 60% can walk. And then on the left side, for those developmental milestones that are achieved, I'm showing the time course over which they achieved them. And you can see that the dashed vertical lines are the CDC norms. So even though our kids sometimes don't achieve these milestones on time, it's reason to have hope that they can develop later and eventually achieve those same milestones. Next, going to look at epilepsy histories. So using the same format type of plot, this one on the right, I'm showing you each dot here is a specific seizure frequency recorded in the electronic health record. And in order to understand these, we translate them into a standardized scale that was championed by the Pediatric Epilepsy Learning Health System, which you can see on the top. It ranges from many per day to several per day, daily, weekly, monthly, and seizure-free, coded by color. So the first thing we looked at is what is the seizure onset in different groups. So here you can see that there's earlier seizure onset in those with gain-of-function variants compared to loss-of-function, which is probably not surprising to anyone in this room. And then we can actually map for each individual in monthly time bins, how do their seizure frequencies change over time? So that's what I'm showing here. Each of these vertical bars represents a month of life from birth to 2 years of age, and it's like a stacked bar graph. So the proportion of the bar that is different colors is the proportion of individuals with seizure frequencies that fall in that range. And what you can see is that kids with SCN8A have a lot of seizures, and they happen very frequently. And then we can also pull seizure medication prescriptions. So here I'm showing you each dot is a medication prescription in the electronic health record, and we've aligned them here relative to the time of SCN8A diagnosis. And what you notice is there seems to be a difference from before the dashed line and after the dashed line. We see much more use of sodium channel blockers and Onfi and cannabidiol after children are diagnosed with SCN8A. So when we have seizure frequencies over time and we have medication prescriptions over time, we can combine those two together to get a sense of whether medications are working. We can look at time-locked seizure medication prescriptions combined with their seizure frequencies and see if we're actually seeing an improvement. And across the whole population, this is what we see. So we look at both the likelihood of medications of reducing seizure frequency or maintaining seizure freedom, and then a combined metric. And what we really see here is that lamotrigine is the only medication that's significantly associated with seizure control across the SCN8A population. But we can also split this up for those with gain-of-function variants and those with loss-of-function variants. And what we see is that overall lamictal signal is really driven by the gain-of-function kids, which is not surprising. And then for those with loss-of-function, we see that ethosuximide seems to be the most effective medication, which makes sense because a lot of these kids have absence seizures, and ethosuximide is a really good medication for those. And then finally, I'm going to touch on administrative claims data. This can be somewhat controversial because this data is very, very superficial, but it lets us get at a really, really large population. So in our study, we were able to get data on 949 individuals with SCN8A by scraping insurance claims data. And the real power here comes from the fact that you get a lot of people with specific recurrent variants, so you can really characterize those separately. So what we did was we used the metadata from genetic test reports to identify our cohort of patients with either pathogenic, likely pathogenic, or VUSs in SCN8A. And then we went through and individually assessed each of those variants to see if we thought they were causative. So we looked at like the nomad allele frequency, we looked at the variant impact using like ClinVar, the CLIA certified lab findings and functional evidence from Phoenix, and then we looked at in silico predictors such as the CAD or REVEL scores. And then from the cohort of individuals, we mapped their ICD-10 codes that we got from the claims data onto the human phenotype ontology. And this is one of the things we found. So here we're showing you the results for 4 different recurrent variants and which clinical phenotypes are most common in those groups. So what you'll see here is, for example, in the 1872 group, we see a strong signal for developmental regression. In the 1877s, we see lots of status epilepticus. In 850, we see neonatal hypotonia. And then in 1617, we see a lot of bilateral tonic-clonic seizures. But what I previously showed you was just a snapshot in time collapsing across the lifespan. We can also do this looking longitudinally with time-stamped clinical features. And what we see when we do that is we see a really strong signal for early status epilepticus and focal onset seizures in the 1877 variants. So in sum, I hope I was able to show you how we can use real-world data to really get a nice understanding of the longitudinal disease history in SCN8A, how we can kind of nail down on those epilepsy trajectories and anti-seizure medications, and then how we can use administrative claims data to get at some of the more rare subgroups because we really just are able to maximize our numbers that way. So thank you. I want to thank my funding sources and especially the CUTE syndrome and Cure Epilepsy. Happy to take any questions. Oh, yeah. Oh, they're running a mic.
Hi there. So this evening we've heard quite a bit about your own studies into studying past known data, as well as Mr. Hack and his language models and machine learning. And I'm going to go ahead and call the good doctor as well for his seemingly creation for algorithms. I wonder if there's been explored the benefit of using some of these AI models to go back through past data, like as you've already done for confirmed SCN8A patients, looking for those that may have existed prior to the diagnosis and see if there was more data there, because that's always seems to be the problem, is that there's just not enough data to go around. But what if we were to use these AI tools to increase our understanding of the diagnosis before we knew the diagnosis existed?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a lot of exciting tools that are coming into development. With electronic medical record data, we have the advantage of even after kids are diagnosed, we can go back and get their prior records, so we can try to figure that out. And we have had some studies where we've looked at early predictive factors based on electronic medical record data using like NLP, like natural language processing, to extract the clinical features and see if we can predict a genetic epilepsy diagnosis prior to the child actually getting it, and we actually do pretty good with that. So I think a lot of it is like increasing access to genetic testing, increasing education of providers all over the world so that people know when they should get genetic testing.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions. First, for the pulling the reports from medical fields, how does this relate to some of us who are in more rural areas? And even though my kiddo has an SCN8A diagnosis, there's conflicting reports between Marshfield system and Mayo system on how it's presenting, because he's a loss of function. However, he did potentially have seizures on day 2 after birth. And so there's no definitive there. And then even with the MRI information, they both read the MRIs differently. They read the EEGs differently. And there's no consensus there. So like if you're pulling that data, it's going to look different. And then I guess the retrospective part, and I apologize if this is insensitive to some people, but is there a way to tap into information medically in a situation where sudden infant death? Because I feel like there's a lot of information there and autopsies are required. How many of them had something that whole genome, if that was part of that autopsy requirement? Could we use that retrospective data to fill in those blanks that could help you guys in your depth and breadth of understanding how our bodies are impacted by these variants?
Yeah, those are great questions. In terms of the disparity between medical records at different institutions, this is a problem with real-world data that we recognize. It's not as rigorous as like a formal prospective natural history study. So we accept some of that ambiguity in our medical records at the exchange for having increased numbers. We get more data on a broader population because we're not asking families to come travel and visit us every 6 months and subject their children to like a full day battery of assessments. But the trade-off is that some of these features are unclear. And then to get at your second question, I have some colleagues who I know are working on like sudden death in childhood and like doing whole genome sequencing and trying to identify underlying genetic causes that are associated with sudden death. So I would stay tuned because I think those results are coming.
I can just shout. Oh, okay. Sorry, I don't need to shout. In one of your slides, you said that lamotrigine was one of the drugs that was most effective. How did you do that study? Because the kids, I thought, were on lots of drugs. Is that the first drug they're on? Because then are different clinicians just picking different drugs? I mean,
yeah, great question. So for this first pass of the seizure comparative effectiveness medications, we're looking at each medication separately. So start time and like onset and offset, and then looking at how the seizure frequencies change during that time. We're not accounting for the fact that they could have been on other medications. at that time. So we have sometimes looked at like different combinations, but it's tricky because they don't start the combinations at the same time and stop them at the same time. So we hope with like using big data and averaging across many people, the signals stay true for those individual seizure medications. But yes, that is a recognized limitation.
Left the microphone I had up there on the stand. Thank you for that. It's really great work, and I really enjoyed reading the paper. So I think we have this hope that making a diagnosis and putting a patient on proper medication is going to have an impact on seizure frequency and developmental trajectories potentially. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that or are able to look at this with this kind of data, but do you see any change, or do you know if there's any change before and after diagnosis in terms of seizure frequency, number one, and then maybe some sense of like their developmental trajectory before and after?
Yeah, so it's tricky with real-world data. So in terms of seizure frequency, we can look at when the meds are started relative to diagnosis and then see whether effective meds are started and see whether seizures get better. For development, it's trickier because we're not doing standardized developmental assessments to see whether individual kids really improve. So unfortunately, we can't really assess that in a rigorous way with real-world data. But that would need more standardized assessments.
One more.
Yes, one more in the word.
Thank you. So I was wondering, how far are we from starting using these algorithms that you have developed to try and predict a diagnosis, not only in the US, but all over the world where whole genome sequencing is still not a thing, but there's lots of information that could feed your model, right?
Yeah, great question. So we have looked using not quite this approach, because we were like manually curating the HPO terms in these individuals, and then from our cohort, and then Citizen, we had an algorithm to convert them from the information we got from Citizen into the HPO terminology. But we have had other studies where we've used natural language processing and LLMs to extract these clinical features from the notes and then predict whether individuals would go on to have a diagnosis of a specific genetic epilepsy, and that is definitely feasible. I think we still want the genetic testing because a lot of these conditions are very heterogeneous and there's a lot of overlap. So for some conditions, it's like very clear. Like I'm thinking of like Dravet, you can probably predict more reliably because the phenotype is tighter. And a lot of other neurodevelopmental disorders have a much broader range of phenotypes. It's a little trickier to predict the specific one. But I do think a prediction of whether genetic testing would benefit a child is definitely feasible in helping stratify when you're in a more resource-limited situation, which children you should prioritize genetic testing for. All right, thank you.
Shoes back on. Oh, heavens. I just wanted to take a moment and do a round of applause for our presenters tonight. What an amazing job. Not only for your hard work and dedication to this community, but just to take out a few minutes of time from your AES schedule. Like, I don't fully understand, but just a tiny bit, how crazy this whole entire week and weekend is, and for you to come and spend hours with us is really, really important. So thank you so much. It is now my honor to welcome on stage the Cute Syndrome Foundation's founder, board chair, and Esme's mom, Hilary Savoy, to share an exciting announcement for our SCN8A community.
I think I made the right choice not going up that.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Kacie. It's an absolute pleasure to be on this stage for the 11th gathering. Is that real? And it's particularly pleasant to get up here in these recent years where I actually don't have to do anything to make this all happen. So I do want to take a moment just to shout out to the team that makes this work. You guys are amazing. Thank you. Yeah, go for it. So over the last 10 years, we've seen some extraordinary progress in the SCN8A community, in clinical trials, structured family support, scientific understanding, and global disease awareness. We know this is not enough yet. We know this. Not even close. But it is really tremendous at the same time. Advancements like these never come from the efforts of one institution, one group, one individual. They only happen when many people work together with shared purpose and determination. And so each year, I think it's really important that we pause and we recognize the progress that is really, truly only possible thanks to the leadership of a number of individuals in our community, including advocates, family advocates, without whose dedication we would not be here. So first, I want to take a moment to acknowledge Dr. Michael Hammer, whose quest on behalf of his daughter, Shay, is the reason we even know about SCN8A. Because of Michael and Shay, we began this journey with a shared purpose. We also owe a great gratitude to another SCN8A parent, Julianne Bradish, who brought the original virtual support group to life, where families could find each other, connect, share, learn. And it was through a partnership with Julianne, along with a small group of volunteers, that this event happened. The first of these gatherings, 11 gatherings ago, which we opened to all families. Our goal was very, very simple, but powerful. To ensure that families had their rightful place as equal stakeholders in conversations about SCN8A. Also have to thank Kacie Craig, surprise, who is driven by her love for her daughter as well, and her leadership in the role of executive director has really helped carry the foundation into its current form, where our focus is not only on scientific advancement, but also on improvements for real, everyday quality of life for our families, because they also require support right now. Today, I also have the honor of welcoming two other pioneers in the SCN8A space, Mother Gabby Conecker and grandmother Jayetta Hecker. They are co-founders behind a number of efforts, Wishes for Elliot, DEEP, the SCN8A Alliance, and the Inchstones Project. These two women have worked tirelessly to build momentum and create change for the future of all of our children, from those with SCN8A to the broader DEEs. Through persistent advocacy and deep collaboration between families, researchers, and industry, our community has driven more than a decade of remarkable advancement. Mouse models, zebrafish, a patient registry, clinical trials, consensus guidelines, research roadmaps, and now gene therapy on the horizon. A lot of it driven in collaboration with family advocates and funded by donations raised by families who all help guide us and where our focus should be. This is progress we can all be profoundly proud of. And it's momentum that we are going to be committed to carrying forward for years to come. And on that note, since this last summer, the Acute Syndrome Foundation and the SCN8A Alliance have been working quietly behind the scenes on a new innovative program designed to accelerate scientific discovery even further by pooling our organizational resources. So it is my honor to invite Jayetta Hecker and Gabby Conacher to the stage to announce a little bit more about this milestone in our community.
Like all of you, our path to advocacy and organization was from despair and hopelessness and pain and the lack of answers. When Elliot was diagnosed in 2015, there were 12 cases in the world, and nobody knew anything. So a year and a half of that journey, waiting for an answer, and an answer came with no answers and more questions. But at that moment, we also found Dr. Hammer and Hillary and Julianne, and we gathered in my living room. It was the first SCN8A families we'd ever met. The Facebook group hadn't even been launched yet, and it was on the eve of the first scientific gathering of SCN8A professionals and the first publication about the state of knowledge about SCN8A. Together we began to chart the course, thinking about the roles that we, at that time, Wishes for Elliot and the registry, and at that time, as you mentioned, the Facebook group was separate, and we really tried to think about how we would work together, and we have tried, but it's been challenging. But we are here tonight at a moment that is the culmination of this last year and a half of behind-the-scenes effort, basically really Gabi and Kacie working tirelessly to bridge our different roles, different perspectives, and combine efforts and really accelerate progress. So I will just turn it over to Gabi, who will tell you a little bit more about what this is and the exciting moment it represents for our community, really recognizing that there is only one path forward, and it's working together, and that's how we accelerate progress. So thank you for having us here and our collaboration.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight. I've been at many of these gatherings, and it's always been an incredibly powerful time for us all to be together, sharing, loving each other, giving each other hugs, being in a space where we finally feel like somebody understands what we live and go through every day. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today to announce the launch of a new global SCN8A research grants program. And this is something, as Jayetta and Hillary have mentioned, that we have been working on for quite a while. It started when we won our CZI award, the idea that we really wanted to build something together. And we've been having conversations with all of these global leaders and with TCSF to say, what can we do to really advance the pace of progress? And this is what we came up with, and we're really excited about where we're going with this. So you can see the logos of quite a number of groups on the screen right now. The UK and Ireland is missing. I got late notice and I didn't have a chance to update the slides, but they are with us. And we know that other groups will be coming along. You know, there's another, overall there's 12 groups working around the world on this, and so we're excited to build this out together. Quickly, these will launch in Q1 of 2026. I have a calendar, you'll see, not a calendar, a timeline in a minute that you'll see. These will be seed grants of up to $50,000. There will be both a scientific and caregiver review process. As you know, everything that we do in the SCN8A space is really rooted in the SCN8A caregiver and family experience. These will be for a period of 12 months and open to researchers around the world. Our goal is to open the RFP on February 9th. Oh, that just got louder. February 9th, which is, hopefully you all know, is International SCN8A Awareness Day. We will then have proposals due by early April, review committees working by late May, and funding to be announced in July. So this is forthcoming. If you are a researcher in the room and you have projects you're working on, start thinking about what you might want to propose. And we're really focusing in on the findings from the research roadmap meeting that many of us in the room here, all the leaders from these different organizations, attended together last year in Boston. These were the 5 gaps that emerged from hearing from more than 175 families around the world, clinicians, researchers, and pharmaceutical companies, that these are the gaps we have to fill to rapidly advance better care and treatment for our loved ones with SCN8A. Transformative therapeutics like ASOs, genetic therapies, non-seizure outcomes. We heard people talking about behaviors and challenging behaviors, GI issues. The list goes on. You saw a bunch of them when Dr. Schreiber presented the work from our consensus. We know that there's a lot more to SCN8A than seizures. Improving current therapeutics. This came out of the roadmap discussions with people like Megan and Dr. Fitzgerald. We're in a small group talking we need to understand how the current medications are working. And to do that, we need to better track seizures and medications together, which is what Josh Hack was talking about too in this prospective study. So some of these are already underway. Discovering and applying biomarkers, which will help us better predict SCN8A and the course of the disease and target therapies. And then understanding how the whole brain and the whole body are impacted by SCN8A. So, what's been really powerful is that, as Hillary, so beautifully shared, right, we have made tremendous progress in the space of SCN8A. In the upper right, you'll see this is a timeline of many different happenings in the SCN8A space. It's accelerating quickly, and the dotted line is the number of publications on SCN8A and how they've been growing over time. So we are making tremendous progress. This article that was talking about precision therapy for genetic epilepsies, of which there are now roughly 1,000 that are known. SCN8A was pulled out as a case for what can happen when a community comes together. You can see at the bottom, it says the example of Milicin, which is a N of 1 trial that happened, and SCN8A-related epileptic encephalopathy are proof that teams with the necessary combination of expertise, federal resources, expertise, clinicians, scientists, patient advocates, federal resources, and regulatory bodies can efficiently shepherd, what does that say? Particular therapies through the pipeline. We've made such incredible progress as a community because of all of the things that we have done together, all of the work that TCSF has done, that Michael Hammer has done with the registry, that the Alliance and our team members and clinicians and researchers have done together, and every single family who's contributed to that by sharing their story, their experiences, to help us learn. And we know that SCN8A is rapidly expanding, right? We're seeing so many more families who have kids that are maybe not having seizures or maybe are having absence seizures, but many behavioral challenges. And we only learn that because of all of you sharing. So we're really excited that together we're advancing progress for SCN8A, and I think the horizon looks very bright for all of us because we are all committed to working together. Every single person in this room wants better answers for our children, for all of those that have come before who have been lost. We owe that to each of them to help build a better future for everyone living with SCN8A. So thank you.
Thank you. We are very excited. All right, well, we are towards the end of the evening, and I wanted to take a moment to give a special thank you to Minaj and John for hosting our presentations again this year and for endless support for our community, even if it took John literally running here from another meeting so he could present at the very end. We appreciate you both so very much, and you've been extremely helpful to me over the years. I also wanted to say thank you to Raquel with the Alliance. I know that you have helped a lot with the grant program, and it's been very, very helpful. Thank you for all your help. I'd also like to take a moment to thank our 2 platinum sponsors, Neurocrine Biosciences and Praxis Precision Medicine, and our bronze sponsor, Lundbeck, and our financial support from the Epilepsy Foundation. Before we close for the evening, I'd like to take a moment to present our 2025 Cuties Awards. After the first gathering, held in 2015, TCSF saw a handful of individuals rise to the opportunity to work collaboratively to improve the health and safety of those living with SCN8A. As a result, we created the Cuties, our annual awards for champions for understanding, treating, investigating, and empowering those with SCN8A. We have 3 Cutie Awards this year, 1 researcher, 1 clinician, and 1 family member that has gone above and beyond our community. This year, the Researcher Award goes to Dr. Elena Gardella. Elena is online, I believe. She was unable to attend this evening, but I would like to say a few things about Elena. Dr. Gardella is an Italian neurologist and clinical neurophysiologist with more than 20 years of experience in researching, diagnosing, and treating complex epilepsies. She is currently an associate professor at the University of Southern Denmark, working in the Department of Clinical Neurophysiology, as well as the Department of Epilepsy Genetics and Personalized Medicine at the Danish Epilepsy Center. Her research focuses on deep phenotyping, newly discovered genetic epilepsies, bridging the gap between gene discovery and clinical practice, and laying the groundwork for personalized counseling and targeting treatments, including emerging therapeutic options. In addition to her extensive publications on SCN8A, Dr. Gardella leads the International Natural History Study, coordinating a global network of clinicians who contribute data from around the world. On a personal note, Elena is a genuinely beautiful person inside and out who cares deeply for this community. She is a joy to work with and is always willing to go above and beyond to support our families. This award is truly well-deserved, so much so that we even had to take a double take because we were convinced she had already received it. So congratulations, Dr. Elena Gardella, on finally receiving your Cuties Award. We will make sure that she gets her award. I would now like to introduce TCSF's Director of Development and Communications and Lucy's mom, Danielle Hayward, will now present the Clinician Award.
This year, the Clinician Award goes to Dr. Ethan Goldberg. Dr. Ethan Goldberg was nominated by Jennifer Stout, mother to SCN8A warrior Ryan. Many children have traveled across the country to see Dr. Goldberg at Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania and have nothing but wonderful things to say about his knowledge, bedside approach, and treatment plans. But Jennifer's nomination said it best. Dr. Goldberg has always gone above and beyond for our son Ryan. It does not matter if it's during the week, on weekends, holidays, daytime, or nighttime. He has always responded if I've emailed. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that he saved not only Ryan's life, but his quality of life as well. Congratulations, Dr. Goldberg. Dr. Goldberg was unable to attend this evening, but we will be sure to get him his award. And now we would like to introduce Shelley Frappier, our Director of Patient Engagement and Data Management, to present our Family Cutie Award.
The lights are very bright up here. This one I'm really excited about. Tonight we gather to recognize extraordinary people who embody what it means to be champions for understanding, treating, investigating, and empowering those affected by SCN8A. And sometimes a hero doesn't lead from a stage or a lab or a boardroom. Sometimes she leads quietly, steadily, and with a heart big enough to hold an entire community. Our family award recipient this year is someone I have stood beside since the very beginning, but truly every day for the past 7 years. Many of you know her as the heart and soul of the TCSF Family Support Group. She is the person who will stop whatever she is doing to say a prayer with you. She is the one who will cry with you when the weight feels too heavy. And she is just as quick to celebrate every ray of hope and every hard-won victory. Her path has been far from easy. She has carried pain and grief that most people cannot imagine, yet through it all, she has chosen compassion, she has chosen service, and she has chosen us. Even in retirement from the executive committee, she continues to give countless hours each week, quietly reaching out, checking in, holding space, and offering comfort to our bereaved parents. She ensures that no one in this community ever feels alone. Karen, your love, your strength, your unwavering presence are gifts to all of us. You have shaped this community in ways that words can never fully capture. Your legacy is in every family you've lifted up, every parent you've comforted, and every life you've touched with your grace. It is my absolute honor to present this year's Cutie Family Award to someone who embodies the very best of what community means, Karen Varner. Thank you, Karen, for everything you have given and everything you continue to give. You are cherished beyond measure. Thank you. Okay. Not saying anything.
Thank you all, clinicians, researchers, industry partners, sponsors, and especially our families. What is evident through this gathering is that progress doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when people with different expertise, experiences, and perspectives come together with a common purpose. Collaboration is the engine of progress, and tonight reminds us just how strong that engine is when we work side by side. Every conversation, every question, every connection built tonight strengthens the foundation of our global SCN8A community. Together, we are truly unstoppable. Thank you for being here, for believing in our shared mission. Together, let us move forward, powered by community, inspired by hope, and united in the pursuit of a brighter tomorrow. Thank you. Also, if you want to donate your lanyard back to us, we'd be more than happy to take it. So you can drop it on the registration table on your way out. Again, thank you so much and safe travels back home.